Hey guys, welcome back to Boring History to Sleep. Tonight we dive into one of the strangest, slipperiest, and most eyebrow-raising figures of the 20th century. His eyes are said to pierce through your soul, his beard is questionable at best, and his life was such a wild ride that if you pitched it as a Netflix series, the execs would say, "Too much, cut the bit with the poison cake." But no, it's all supposedly real. We're heading deep into the icy veins of old Russia, where superstition still clings like frost on a window pane. Our story begins in a place so cold, your eyelashes freeze just for stepping outside, and so remote it makes your cousin's off-grid cabin look like a Manhattan penthouse. Tonight, we explore the man they called the Mad Monk, Grigori Rasputin. Before you settle in, take a quick second to hit that like button and subscribe, only if you really appreciate the content I share. And if you've got a second, drop your location and local time in the comments. I love seeing where and when you're tuning in. Alright, time to lower the lights, maybe a fan on for that quiet background hum, and together, we'll settle into tonight's adventure. It begins in Pokrovskoye, a small, snow-sunk village in the Tobolsk province of Siberia, far from Moscow's golden spires or St. Petersburg's pastel palaces. The sort of place where wolves howl at night, and everyone knows everyone else's chicken count by heart. There, in January of 1869, a boy named Grigori Yefimovich Rasputin is born. The name Rasputin comes from a root word often interpreted as debauched or licentious, which is honestly a wild bit of foreshadowing. Like naming your kid Mischief and acting surprised when they hotwire your sleigh. Little Grigori comes into the world during an age of superstition, vodka, and czars. His father, Yefim, is a peasant and horse handler who works part-time as a postal coach driver, ferrying official mail across brutally cold terrain, which means Grigori grows up used to the sight of hooves, thick leather, and boots always too wet or too dry. Not that anyone wears them much indoors. Siberians know how to survive after all, even barefoot if they have to. Education? Minimal. Rasputin never really learns to write until adulthood, and even then, it's unpretty. Imagine a chicken stepping in ink and dancing on paper. But even as a child, people notice something about him. An intense gaze, strange behavior, moments where he drifts off into what looks like deep thought or perhaps some kind of trance. You know the type. Every class had a kid who stared out the window like he was talking to ghosts. And maybe Rasputin was. One story, probably embroidered over time like a winter quilt, says that as a boy, Grigori falls sick, feverish, raving, and during the illness begins speaking about things he shouldn't know, things that hadn't happened yet. Villagers say he predicts a barn fire. He warns a man not to cross the river that day. Normal stuff, if you live in a horror movie. Historians still argue whether these childhood tales were real memories, or later inventions by Rasputin's admirers or detractors. But the seed of mystery is planted. He's not your average peasant child. He's not quite normal. He's also not terribly clean. In fact, Rasputin earns a bit of a reputation for, shall we say, earthy habits. Bathing? Optional. Grooming? Questionable. And yet, despite this, perhaps because of it, he begins to cultivate a rough charisma. People are drawn to him, a magnetism that even cold Siberian nights can't frost over. He eventually marries a local girl, Praskovya Dubrovina, and together they have several children. Some die young, tragically common in that era, but the marriage, remarkably, is a stable one. She tolerates his increasingly frequent absences and strange spiritual leanings. Whether she truly believes in him or just finds his quirks tolerable is unclear, but she stays. Around this time, something changes. Rasputin begins having more and more spiritual experiences, visions, callings, dreams that pull him out of bed and into the forest. He claims to speak with the Virgin Mary. He begins praying obsessively and isolating himself for long periods. The villagers begin whispering again. Some call him blessed. Others mutter about demons. Either way, nobody's inviting him to poker night. One day, around the year 1897, Rasputin simply walks away. He leaves his wife, his farm, his village, and begins a spiritual pilgrimage across Russia, just like that. Packs a sack, tugs on his boats, and heads toward the monasteries, barefoot more often than not. which is quite a choice in a place where even your dreams are cold. He walks hundreds of miles. Sometimes he sleeps in barns, sometimes in ditches, sometimes welcomed into monasteries. He speaks to monks, watches, listens, and learns the rhythms of prayer and fasting. He's not a monk himself, not officially, but he soaks it all in like a sponge in a holy water basin. By all accounts, he's not conventionally educated, but he is observant, unnervingly so. He watches people closely, studies how they move, how they lie, how they confess, and somewhere along the way, he starts performing healings, or what look like healings. Someone has a headache, he says a prayer, and they feel better. Someone's livestock falls ill. He touches the animal, mumbles a verse, and poof, better. Again, historians still argue whether Rasputin had any real healing power, or whether it was the classic placebo effect, or maybe just coincidence, misreported and exaggerated by gossip-starved villagers. But the effect is the same. Rasputin is becoming known. One peculiar tidbit from these early travels: Rasputin was sometimes seen carrying a small whip, which he would use to beat himself as part of his prayers. A practice not uncommon in some extreme religious sects, meant to drive out sin and suppress desire. Whether it worked or just added to the local theater is anyone's guess. So here we have a man with almost no formal education, questionable hygiene, no official role in the church, and yet, he's becoming a spiritual figure people can't ignore, even if they want to, even if they try. The icy winds of Siberia swirl on, the orthodox bell ring in distant towers, and somewhere on the long, frost-bitten road, Rasputin trudges forward, one step at a time. A mystic monk in the making, or a fraudster in fur boots? Only time will tell. Its dirty boots crunch over frozen ground. Rasputin walks on, undeterred by frostbite or ridicule. Villagers murmur when they see him approaching, part curiosity, part suspicion. This bearded man with intense eyes, mumbling prayers and blessings, always hungry yet seemingly untouched by hardship. He arrives without warning, stays just long enough to stir things up, and disappears again like smoke after a candle's blown out. He's developing a reputation, but not one easily categorized. By the early 1900s, Rasputin's journeys become longer, stranger, his stops more unpredictable. Sometimes it's a monastery, other times it's the cottage of a rich landowner looking for spiritual comfort, or maybe just a good story. His beard is longer now, darker and unkempt. His clothes hang off of his wiry frame. He eats little, sleeps erratically, and speaks in quiet, riddle-filled phrases that somehow convince people that he knows more than he lets on. He never formally joins a monastery, which surprises many. He claims to reject structure and hierarchy in religious life, preferring the divine chaos of personal connection to God. It's a bold take in an era when priests were ranked like army officers, and religion was practically bureaucratic. And then there's the matter of the Callist. Ah yes, the fringe sect that no bedtime story about Rasputin can escape. The Callists, or more formally, the people of God, are rumored to be a radical spiritual movement that believes in ecstatic rituals, secretive nighttime gatherings, and, allegedly, sin as path to purity theology. That's the polite version. More scandalous whispers suggest they indulged in frenzied dances and carnal rituals designed to exhaust the body and release the soul. Now, here's where things get foggy. Some say Rasputin was introduced to this group during his pilgrimages, that he not only attended their ceremonies, but embraced their methods, that he participated in these night-long gatherings and found his signature spiritual style among them, emotional, intense, personal. But historians still argue whether Rasputin was ever actually a Callist, or if his enemies just loved to slap on the most scandalous label they could find. Regardless, the association clings to him like smoke on wool. What we do know is that Rasputin didn't return home the same man. When he does circle back to Pokrovskoye after a long absence, he's different, deeper somehow, and also weirder. He speaks about visions more freely. He prays aloud in strange tongues. He preaches without a pulpit, slipping into spontaneous sermons in muddy courtyards and half-lit parlors. His neighbors, once willing to shrug off his oddities, now begin to fear him. They say he has power. A peculiar story floats around from this time. Rasputin allegedly locks eyes with a young girl having seizures. He murmurs something inaudible. She stills. Her father claims she never seizes again. Word spreads, another miracle. Maybe, possibly, or maybe just another coincidence wearing a mystic's robe. His wife watches all this unfold with a quiet iron patience. She remains in Pokrovskoye, holding down their home while Rasputin continues walking the cold roads of destiny. She reportedly never questions his growing fame or unusual beliefs. When asked about his unusual lifestyle, she simply says, "He has enough for the both of us." By now, Grigori isn't just drifting between villages. He's heading to bigger places. Monasteries in Kazan, churches in Saratov, drawing rooms in Samara. Each step takes him closer to the heart of Russia, and to the ears of influential people who find his peasant wisdom and divine stare oddly compelling. There's a bit of a mystic boom going on among the elite at the time. It's early 20th century Russia, political instability is rising, and the monarchy's foundations are creaking. Many aristocrats, spooked by the storm clouds ahead, turn to mysticism, hoping for clarity. Spiritualism, palm readings, secret seances, and whispers of fate, all the rage in St. Petersburg's salons. And here comes Rasputin, who seems to channel divine insight like a broken radio with just enough static to be believable. It's the perfect storm for his peculiar gifts. One of the first powerful figures to take an interest in Rasputin is Bishop Theophan, a well-respected Orthodox churchman who hears of the peasant mystic from Kazan. Theophan is intrigued, maybe even a bit amused. But after meeting Rasputin in person, something shifts. The bishop is taken with him. Perhaps it's the intense stare. Perhaps the way Rasputin seems to read people like old books. Either way, Theophan becomes a supporter and introduces Rasputin to others in the clergy. And from there, the spiral upward begins. Another thread often left dangling, Rasputin's habit of avoiding eye contact until he doesn't. And when he stares, really stares, people swear it feels like being submerged. Even people determined to resist him describe that peculiar sensation of drowning in his eyes. One aristocratic woman famously wrote in her diary, "He looked at me and I forgot my own name." Others, however, just say he had creepy eyes. Tomato, tomato. But here's the curious part. Rasputin still isn't dressing the part. He's not wearing clean robes or neat cassocks. He's still in a coarse tunic and worn boots, often unwashed and usually trailing an earthy musk that could kill a houseplant. And yet, he walks into rooms full of perfumed aristocrats, and they lean in rather than recoil. There's something compelling about the contrast. Rasputin radiates peasant authenticity in a world of silk and lies. To some, that's refreshing, to others, threatening. A holy man who doesn't play by their rules? Suspicious, but impossible to ignore. He begins gathering followers, small ones at first, curious servants, lower clergy, a few women from the fringes of society. They listen to his strange sermons and join him in prayer meetings that grow increasingly dramatic. People weep, scream, confess things they didn't even know they'd done. Rasputin encourages it all with slow nods and soft rumbling reassurances. He offers spiritual clarity, but only after you empty out all your darkness. The line between confessor and controller gets fuzzier. He preaches what some interpret as a kind of emotional purging. Sin, regret, shame, all released in the service of divine grace. Cry it out, dance it out, maybe scream a little. It's church, but also therapy. Very loud therapy. And here comes another strange story, passed along by a nobleman who once observed one of Rasputin's gatherings. He swore Rasputin turned to a sickly boy in the back of the room, asked him a single question, "Do you want to be healed?" And the boy stood, straight and strong, as if nothing had ever been wrong. Again, miracle, lie, clever timing. Historians still argue whether Rasputin actually had healing powers, or simply knew how to read a room with masterful subtlety. One fringe theory even suggests he had early knowledge of hypnosis, perhaps picked up during his travels. A kind of proto-psychologist hiding inside a wild-eyed prophet. Whatever the truth, the man is rising. His name spoken more frequently now in candlelit circles and echoey drawing rooms. Some call him saintly, others call him dangerous. A few, always whispered, call him the devil in a cassock. But Rasputin doesn't seem to care. He continues on, boots muddy, eyes gleaming, mumbling prayers under his breath as he climbs toward St. Petersburg and toward the most powerful family in Russia, the Romanovs. A freezing mist rises from the cobblestones as Rasputin arrives in St. Petersburg, the imperial capital glittering under layers of snow and scandal. It's the early 1900s, and the city hums with a strange tension. Carriages clatter past cathedrals, revolutions brew in smoky corners, and at royal balls, smiles stretch too tightly across anxious faces. Here, Russia's rich and restless gather, clutching goblets with one hand and their fragile futures with the other. Into this world walks a man who smells like barns and blesses people in half-muttered prayers. No invitation, no connections, just a relentless spiritual swagger. St. Petersburg is full of people pretending to understand mysticism. It's trendy among the aristocracy to host palm readers, whisper about dreams, and pretend they didn't just attend another private seance. Enter Rasputin. No costume, no showmanship, just raw charisma in those eyes. You know, the ones that apparently can freeze vodka. He's introduced to religious circles first. Clergy, monks, curious bishops. His name has been drifting through the religious underground like incense in a drafty church. And now, the man himself is here, alive, real, confusing. He's not what they expected. He's tall, hunched a little, with long hands and that scraggly beard that looks like it lost a bar fight with a hedge. His robe is threadbare, his speech slow and uneven. But when he talks about God, rooms go silent. People hang on each unpredictable word, waiting for a flash of something divine, or at least moderately profound. One anecdote from this early time in the city describes Rasputin walking into a lavish salon hosted by a countess known for her obsession with spiritual matters. Surrounded by crystal chandeliers and perfume clouds, Rasputin allegedly ignores everyone, walks over to the fireplace, and begins softly crying. Not from sadness, he says, but from the pain of feeling everyone's sins the moment he entered. Creepy, maybe. Powerful, apparently. He starts collecting aristocratic patrons, particularly women. Some see him as a spiritual guide. Others view him as a walking riddle. A few, let's be honest, are simply drawn to the forbidden thrill of having a wild-eyed peasant whispering Bible verses in their ear while the samovar hisses in the background. Among the believers, one name begins to stand out: Anna Vyrubova, a close friend of the Empress Alexandra. Anna meets Rasputin and is instantly spellbound. No surprise, really. She introduces him to higher and higher circles, until, eventually, Rasputin's name reaches the one place where destiny is waiting: the royal palace. Now, you have to understand something about Alexandra. Empress Alexandra is not just royalty, she's also deeply, unshakably anxious. Her son, Alexei, is the Tsarevich, heir to the Russian throne, and he's been born with a secret so dangerous it could upend the dynasty: hemophilia. One wrong bump, one fall from a tricycle, and the boy could bleed internally to death. It's the kind of condition that turns every moment into terror. So Alexandra is desperate for control, for hope, for a miracle. And that's exactly what Rasputin brings. Their first meeting is low-key, quiet, and private. Rasputin is led into a candlelit chamber. The boy is pale and fevered. His joints are swollen. The doctors have tried everything, and nothing works. Rasputin sits beside him, murmurs a prayer, and calmly tells Alexandra he will sleep. The boy sleeps. In the morning, the swelling is down. His pain has eased. Alexandra is thunderstruck. So are the doctors, though they try not to show it. Was it a coincidence? Did Rasputin simply time his visit perfectly with the boy's natural recovery? Historians still argue whether Rasputin's soothing presence somehow lowered the boy's blood pressure and reduced internal bleeding, or whether the monk had genuine healing powers. Either way, for the Empress, the effect is real. She now believes that Rasputin has a sacred bond with her son, and not just any bond, one blessed by God. It's not just admiration, it's salvation. She trusts him absolutely, and she starts calling him our friend in her private letters. And when Alexandra believes something, she believes it with the intensity of a cathedral on fire. This is the turning point. Rasputin is no longer just a mysterious wanderer. He's now inside the innermost sanctum of Russian power. The Empress listens to him. The Tsar, Nicholas II, is more skeptical, but wary of contradicting his increasingly emotional wife. He sees that when Rasputin is around, Alexei gets better. That's enough for now. But others are not so thrilled. Within the palace, suspicion is already growing. The court is a nest of wasps, jealous nobles, bored countesses, scheming advisors. To them, Rasputin is a threat. He's unclean, he's crude, he's unpredictable, and most dangerously, he's influential. It doesn't help that Rasputin seems to know exactly how to push their buttons. He doesn't bother with etiquette. He slouches in front of generals. He speaks bluntly. He refuses to bow. One dinner guest recounts how Rasputin sat down at the table before the Tsar did, an offense so shocking it caused a duchess to choke on her beetroot. Still, the imperial family protects him. They give him rooms in the palace. Small ones, sure, but still. He's summoned for healings, for prayers, sometimes just to calm Alexandra's nerves. Rasputin thrives in this strange environment, where incense mixes with paranoia, and everyone pretends not to be watching everyone else. He remains technically unaffiliated with the church. This frustrates some bishops to no end. If he's so holy, they grumble, why won't he take the robes? But Rasputin plays by his own rules. He says he doesn't need titles or institutions. God speaks through the heart, not hierarchy. A quirky detail that starts to pop up in this era. Rasputin begins writing letters, lots of them. Long, rambling, spiritually inflected missives to aristocrats and believers. His handwriting is atrocious, like a drunk spider tap dancing through ink, but people cherish them like relics. He signs many of them simply, the humble Grigori. But humble? Well, his confidence grows. He starts referring to himself more openly as a man of destiny. His words are still spiritual, but they're becoming more cryptic. He speaks of storms to come, of Russia's need for faith. At gatherings, he slips into sudden trances. People watch, breath held, as he sways and murmurs. One general writes in his diary that Rasputin once stared into a mirror for 15 minutes, then announced that the mirror had blinked. Make of that what you will. Outside the palace, rumors start spreading. The newspapers begin to catch wind of this strange holy man with access to the royal bedrooms. They print subtle digs at first, referring to him as the pious wanderer or the bearded mystery. But over time, the satire sharpens, the jokes get meaner. Cartoons appear showing Rasputin controlling the royal family like puppets. Editorials whisper about his unholy influence. Back in the salons and parlors of St. Petersburg, society begins dividing into two camps. Those who believe Rasputin is a miracle worker sent from heaven, and those who believe he's the biggest con artist since whoever invented powdered wigs. And through it all, Rasputin smiles, that slow, unreadable smile, because he knows something they don't. He's just getting started. Rasputin walks deeper into the labyrinth of Russian high society, his boots muddying marble floors, his prayers echoing off painted ceilings. By now, his presence is no longer a curiosity, it's a full-blown phenomenon. Everyone has a Rasputin story, and none of them sound quite the same. To some, he's a saintly figure lit by divine fire. To others, he's a smirking fraud, muddying the sacred with sleight of hand and sweat. Yet, no matter the opinion, they all seem to agree on one thing. The man is impossible to ignore. That magnetic pull intensifies as Rasputin becomes entangled, directly or indirectly, with some of the more questionable sects of Russian mysticism. The Klists, those shadowy flagellants of religious folklore, hovered just behind his reputation like a ghost in a smoky icon corner. Tales keep resurfacing, whispered at candlelit suppers and in whispered church corridors. The Klist, short for Christoverae, or Christ believers, are known for their extreme asceticism, self-punishment rituals, and ecstatic ceremonies. According to rumor, their belief system hinges on sinning to achieve purity. Yes, you heard that right. Sin boldly, repent fervently, achieve enlightenment. A paradox wrapped in candle wax and guilt. Rasputin denies ever having been a member, and yet, some of his spiritual style echoes their methods a little too closely for comfort. He speaks often of cleansing the soul through pain, through surrender, through total emotional release. His prayer meetings involve weeping, collapsing, groaning, a holy mess of spiritual catharsis, and he often emphasizes the idea that only by touching darkness can one truly appreciate the light, which sounds deep until you realize it's also a pretty convenient excuse for questionable behavior. Historians still argue whether Rasputin was ever formally part of the cliques or merely influenced by their fringe theology during his early wanderings. There's no conclusive evidence, just a long, lingering shadow, and Rasputin, for all his openness, remains frustratingly vague whenever the subject comes up. He simply deflects, smiling faintly, eyes twinkling as if to say, "You wouldn't understand anyway." But let's pivot from theology to posture, because here's the thing. Rasputin doesn't act like other holy men. He doesn't speak with forced humility or adopt the syrupy tones of a practiced preacher. He speaks in fits and starts. Sometimes he rambles, other times he falls silent mid-sentence, eyes glazed over like he's reading something just beyond the veil. And then there's the infamous habit. He touches people. A lot. On the shoulder, on the arm, on the forehead. Not in a creepy way, at least not always, but in a deliberate theatrical one. Touch, for Rasputin, is part of his spiritual toolkit. He believes in physical contact as a channel of divine energy. His blessings are intimate, personal, almost awkwardly close. Some of his followers claim that a single touch from him cured headaches or restored sleep. Others, less impressed, just felt uncomfortable and slightly damp. Of course, rumors start to coil around his interactions with women. Rasputin is surrounded by them. Devoted ladies of the court, noble women in mourning, curious wives of ministers. They attend his sessions, hang on his words, call him their father or spiritual friend. He visits them at odd hours, sometimes alone, sometimes behind closed doors. It doesn't take long for people to assume the worst. One popular and likely exaggerated story tells of a duchess who invites Rasputin for a private blessing, only for him to suggest that sin must be shared to be released. What happened after that? Well, depends on who's telling it. Some say prayer, others say passion. One version includes a strategically extinguished candle and a servant who pretended not to see. True or not, these rumors accumulate like snow on a poorly shoveled path. They weigh down his reputation, even as his influence grows. Church leaders grow anxious. Rasputin may have no official title, but his proximity to the Tsarina, his supposed miracles, and his ever-expanding circle of worshippers make him dangerous. A fringe holy man is one thing. A fringe holy man with political influence is quite another. And it's not just whispers behind curtains anymore. Some within the Orthodox Church start writing letters, formal complaints sent to bishops and even to the Tsar himself. They demand Rasputin be dismissed, investigated, restrained. They argue that he's leading souls astray, that he's blurring the sacred with the profane, that he's mocking the very idea of spiritual purity. Nicholas II, ever cautious, ever indecisive, hesitates. Alexandra, on the other hand, does not. She fiercely defends Rasputin, writes long letters praising his virtue, his wisdom, his holy connection. She insists he's the only one who can help her son, that God sent him, that the people around her are jealous, small-minded, blind. This only adds fuel to the fire. Now Rasputin isn't just a mystic, he's a wedge, a fault line in the heart of Russia's ruling elite. A fringe anecdote from this period? Rasputin reportedly writes a letter warning that if he is ever killed by government officials or nobles, the Tsar and his family will not survive another 2 years. A chilling prophecy, or perhaps just a well-calculated bit of psychological warfare. Either way, it sticks. And what's Rasputin doing while all this is swirling? He's being Rasputin, blessing children, visiting churches, performing odd rituals in people's living rooms, handing out dubious advice about health, love, and taxes. One countess claims he once cured her migraines by waving a candle over her forehead while reciting a prayer that included the word cabbage. Another detail that emerges from his inner circle. Rasputin doesn't sleep much. He often stays up until dawn, pacing, praying, or, allegedly, writing letters to the Empress. His sleep schedule is less monk and more caffeinated jazz musician. Some say he dreams of angels. Others say he just talks to himself a lot. Even his enemies have to admit, there's something there. You don't rise from a muddy village to the throne room of an empire by accident. Whether it's raw charisma, divine intervention, or just the power of confidence and weird timing, Rasputin keeps winning. He begins dressing slightly better, though better is generous. He upgrades from peasant rags to simple priest-like robes. Still no bathrobe couture, but cleaner. Ish. He sometimes carries a handkerchief now. Progress. And as his spiritual following grows, so does his notoriety. People start calling him the Mad Monk, which is interesting since he's technically neither mad nor a monk. But hey, branding is everything. He becomes a figure of national fascination. Satirical plays mock him, poets mention him in passing, even foreign diplomats start taking notice. The British ambassador writes home that the Russian court is haunted by a wild-eyed charlatan, but Rasputin doesn't mind. He just keeps showing up. To parties, to prayer meetings, to private dinners he was never invited to, but somehow ends up leading. Somewhere in the background of this holy circus, the seeds of revolution are quietly being planted. Workers grumble. The war machine stirs. The royal family tiptoes through a house of cards, built on divine right philosophy and fragile hope. And in the center of it all stands Rasputin, smiling, silent, watching. The court smells of lavender water, beeswax polish, and secrets. Within its velvet-lined chambers, Rasputin becomes both fixture and phantom, always around, never predictable. Servants murmur when they see him padding softly through corridors, hair damp with dew or maybe sweat, robes askew, eyes gleaming with something otherworldly, or just the last flickers of a very late night. To the royals, he's our friend. To the rest of the palace, he's something closer to a spiritual house guest who never checks out. And yet, for someone with such presence, Rasputin remains remarkably unchanged by the glamour around him. He does not speak in French, as the other courtiers do. He does not stand stiffly like a soldier, or offer groveling bows like a flatterer. He slouches, he mumbles. Sometimes he forgets to button things properly. And most noticeably of all, he smells. It's not something you'd print on a historical monument, but yes, Rasputin was famously pungent. His hygiene, or lack thereof, became something of legend. According to one noble woman, he reeked of goat and garlic and something I could never name. Another remembered a visit to a drawing room where Rasputin sat silently while everyone else tried not to breathe through their noses. Still, nobody asked him to leave. Why? Because when he spoke, he seemed to see people. Not just their faces, but something behind their eyes. Their fears, their shames, their quiet, guilty hopes. His spiritual charisma was undeniable, even when paired with socks so dirty they could be weaponized. He spoke with simplicity, short sentences, parables sometimes, warnings other times. He used metaphors of fields, of water, of trees bending in wind. He spoke as if he'd just walked out of the book of Proverbs and landed in your foyer, and for some inexplicable reason, it worked. Of course, there were those who suspected it was all smoke and mirrors, that Rasputin, the mystic, was merely Rasputin, the grubby manipulator. But even skeptics found themselves rattled after 10 minutes of conversation. There's one recorded moment where a famous general confronted Rasputin in public, only to later confess in his journal that his eyes unnerved me. I forgot my argument halfway through. I felt I had sinned. Still, in private gatherings, Rasputin's mystique sometimes gave way to something stranger. There were the prayer meetings, held in salons and dimly lit homes. These weren't your average recitations of the Psalms. They included wailing, confessions, trance-like weeping, spontaneous dancing, and emotional purges that would put most modern therapy sessions to shame. Picture people in pearls and cravats sobbing into lace kerchiefs, while Rasputin mumbled obscure scripture and passed around a glass of wine that might or might not be sacramental. He had a habit of holding women's hands while praying for them. Long, lingering contact, sometimes murmuring phrases that didn't quite sound like Russian, or prayers. He claimed these were moments of divine clarity. Some claimed they felt healed, others claimed they felt woozy. One maid reportedly fainted after Rasputin blessed her for too long. And then there was the incident of the possessed samovar. According to one of Rasputin's house call hosts, a tea kettle began to shake violently during a spiritual session, right after Rasputin cast a demon out of a depressed merchant's son. Was it nerves? Was it gas? Was it an early case of tremor-induced hallucination? Unclear, but the story spread like a bag of sugar in a boarding school. Even in his more mundane moments, Rasputin left impressions. A member of the Duma once saw him walking through St. Petersburg with his boots on the wrong feet and a sack of bread swinging from his belt. Another recalled Rasputin riding a horse backward, singing psalms. Was it madness, a performance, or just an eccentric man refusing to fit into any box? Historians still argue whether Rasputin deliberately cultivated this strange image to deflect suspicion, or whether he was genuinely that odd. Either way, it worked, because for every whispered insult, there was a desperate duchess ready to sing his praises. For every offended priest, a family secretly passed him letters asking for blessings, healings, or forgiveness. One of the more charmingly bizarre episodes, Rasputin once tried to bless an entire train station, walked out onto the platform, raised his arms, and loudly declared, "Peace to these rails, for they carry the souls of Russia." Then he vanished inside the first-class car, where he promptly fell asleep. There was something oddly endearing about his contradictions. He could be silent for an hour, then burst into booming laughter. He could bless a sick child and then, 2 hours later, dunk his bread in wine and declare, "God loves jam." You never knew what Rasputin would say next, and somehow that made you want to keep listening. Even his handwriting told a tale, jagged, erratic, often illegible. He'd write long letters to the Tsarina, full of religious metaphors and emotional appeals. They read more like dream fragments than actual communication, but Alexandra cherished them. She read them over and over, sometimes aloud. He called her "my dear pure dove." She called him "our friend." The capital letters were intentional. It was this closeness with the Empress that caused real panic among the Russian elite. Not just jealousy, but fear. Because Alexandra didn't just admire Rasputin, she trusted him more than she trusted seasoned advisors, generals, or priests, and what he said often became what she believed. Even Nicholas, who remained skeptical of the holy man's theatrics, deferred to his wife when it came to spiritual matters. Behind every curtain in the palace, ears strained to catch snippets of Rasputin's influence. Did he suggest this appointment? Did he oppose that policy? Was he behind the Empress's latest letter to the Prime Minister? One juicy little detail from this period. A rumor surfaces that Rasputin touched the Tsarina's hand in public. Just once. Just gently. But in the tangled protocol-heavy world of Imperial Russia, that single act sent entire salons into chaos. Was it affection? Disrespect? Hypnosis? Most likely, it was Rasputin being Rasputin. Touching, blessing, smiling. He walks a narrow, foggy line between spiritual advisor and court jester, and no one quite knows how to handle it. Some whisper that he must be eliminated. Others say he must be protected at all costs. He is both threat and shield, disease and cure. And while Russia sways dangerously on the edge of war, hunger, and revolution, Rasputin keeps walking barefoot across palace carpets, leaving muddy footprints on tapestries that once only knew the click of polished boots. The holy man from Pokrovskoye, still unwashed, still unreadable, sits quietly beside the heir to the Russian throne, whispering lullabies in between warnings of doom. And still, the Empress listens. A carriage wheels through slushy St. Petersburg streets, windows fogged, curtains drawn. Inside, whispering voices pass a name back and forth like a forbidden charm. Rasputin, Rasputin, Rasputin. By now, he's more than a rumor. He's a household obsession. Every drawing room discussion, every chilly street corner debate, every lazy gossip column in the capital includes at least one reference to the stare, the smell, or the Empress's strange new confidence. Grigori Yefimovich Rasputin is no longer just a wandering mystic. He's a force, unpredictable, unofficial, and utterly magnetic. The Empress Alexandra clings to him like a lifeline in turbulent waters. Her son, Alexei, is alive, barely, frequently, and thanks to Rasputin, miraculously. The boy's hemophilia has brought the family to its knees time and again, and Rasputin, with his coarse hands and peasant prayers, has become the only remedy that seems to work. He doesn't use medicine. He doesn't carry a bag of potions or quote from Latin texts. No scalpels, no surgical gloves, just words. Calm, slow, strangely accented murmurs. He tells Alexei to sleep, to rest. That pain will pass. And it does. At least sometimes. Often enough to deepen Alexandra's devotion beyond logic. Rasputin becomes her daily spiritual report card. She writes him letters that begin with, "My dear beloved friend," and end with lines like, "Your presence brings peace to my soul." One note from her literally gushes, "You are our angel, sent from heaven to guard us." That kind of adoration, it doesn't go unnoticed. Inside the palace, nobles, aides, and staff trade glances in the hallway. The Empress trusts Rasputin more than the doctors, more than the advisors, more than most of her own family. And when Rasputin gives advice on more than just health, it has a way of echoing up through the halls of power. Did he suggest dismissing that general? Did he nudge the Tsarina to write that furious letter to the Prime Minister? Did he whisper that the Tsar must not retreat from the war? Historians still argue whether Rasputin ever gave real political advice or whether Alexandra merely believed he did. But the effect was the same. People thought he had influence, which, in politics, is influence enough. He now becomes a fixture not only at private palace audiences, but also at official events, though, predictably, he still refuses to blend in. At a grand reception, Rasputin shows up in a wrinkled robe and boots caked in snowmelt. He doesn't bow to the bishops. He doesn't even blink at the generals. He walks through the crowd like he owns the place, or like he just wandered in looking for a warm stove. When someone greets him with a formal title, Rasputin chuckles and says, "I am just a humble man. Why use big words?" Some take that as modesty. Others see it as calculated charm. Either way, the nobles bristle. He is, in their view, an invader. He smells of barns, eats with his fingers, and speaks in riddles. But worse than that, he's a peasant with power. And that's a serious problem for an aristocracy already terrified by the rising tides of revolution and unrest. If the monarchy is seen as consorting with a mystic beggar, especially one with questionable morals, the whole house of cards could topple. Still, Rasputin doesn't act like a man climbing toward power. He doesn't dress for the part. He doesn't collect titles or demand deference. What he collects instead is favors. A nod here, a suggestion there, a whispered name, a warning, a blessing, always vague, always delivered with that same gaze, the one that seems to pass through your skin and into something darker. Around this time, Rasputin's circle begins to expand in odd directions. He meets more aristocrats, yes, but also artists, performers, wounded veterans, widows, random pedestrians even. One strange account describes him stopping a young girl on the Nevsky Prospect and telling her that she will lose her brother within the month. She bursts into tears. Her brother dies in a factory accident weeks later. Coincidence? Probably. But the legend deepens. He blesses newborns, lays hands on dying men, and once, allegedly, cures a sick cat. No joke. A lady in his circle swore her bedridden tabby rose from its pillow after Rasputin stroked its ears and whispered a prayer. More and more people begin to see him as holy, or cursed, or both. In one private gathering, Rasputin claims to see visions of a darkness rising over Russia, like a bear's shadow stretched by fire. Everyone nods solemnly, unsure what it means, but certain it means something. Possibly revolution, possibly indigestion. He remains an enigma. One moment he speaks softly of God's love, the next he's guffawing over crude jokes. He'll quote a psalm with perfect timing, then follow it up with a fable about pigs who couldn't find heaven because they kept eating the map. One aristocrat described dinner with him as a masterclass in discomfort and awe. You didn't know whether to laugh or cross yourself. Despite this, or perhaps because of it, Rasputin's power continues to grow. The Empress becomes more isolated from traditional advisors. She begins to see palace critics as enemies, and Rasputin is all too happy to play the role of protector. He warns her of betrayal, urges her to trust her instincts, to stay strong, to listen only to those chosen by God. It's a strategy that tightens her circle and amplifies his voice. One by one, key figures in the Russian government begin to fall out of favor. Some believe Rasputin's influence helped remove Grand Duke Nikolai Nikolaevich from command. Others claim he pushed for the dismissal of reform-minded ministers in favor of those more pliable or loyal to Alexandra. Officially, Rasputin has no title, no office, no rank. Unofficially, he's becoming the shadow bishop of the Russian court. There's even talk, ridiculous but whispered nonetheless, that he plans to start a new church, a Rasputinite sect. One rooted in personal connection to God, emotional surrender, and long, staring silences. He denies it, of course, but doesn't deny it too hard. His public image becomes more and more outlandish. Satirical newspapers now portray him with glowing eyes, hypnotizing the Tsarina while the Tsar drools in the background. They draw him dancing on the crown jewels or standing naked in a baptismal font, holding a bottle of vodka and shouting at angels. It's absurd and deeply effective. The Russian public, many of whom are struggling with food shortages and war anxiety, start to believe their empire is being manipulated by a half-mad monk. A strange anecdote emerges during this period. Rasputin reportedly told a group of aristocrats that he couldn't die by poison because the devil himself drinks with me and we made a pact. He laughs after saying it, but no one else does. And the palace? It remains firmly in his grasp. Alexandra ignores the clamor. Nicholas hesitates, as usual. He's torn between the growing uproar and his wife's desperate belief that Rasputin is their family's guardian angel. The court watches, tight-lipped, because whether or not Rasputin is guiding policy, he's certainly guiding perception. And in an empire where perception often means power, that's a dangerous skill to possess. The humble peasant from Pokrovskoye now holds the ear of the most powerful woman in Russia, and, by extension, the empire itself. He came with nothing. Now, his whisper shapes the fate of a dynasty. Candles flicker in drawing rooms heavy with incense and suspicion. The Russian elite, already fraying from war and whispering revolution, now face another source of sleeplessness. Rasputin, the holy man in dirty boots, who somehow manages to straddle divine authority and very mortal scandal. He starts appearing in places no one expects him. A nobleman's birthday supper, a military strategy meeting, the edge of a ballroom where the floor sparkles with gold-threaded gowns and soldiers' medals. Sometimes he's invited, sometimes he simply shows up, like an off-script ghost that people try to ignore until he speaks. And when he does, the room always goes still. There's a particular party that people still talk about, held at the opulent mansion of Countess Ignatieva, a woman with a fondness for spiritual experiments and 7 kinds of liquor. The evening was meant to be a casual gathering of intellectuals and aristocrats. Then Rasputin walks in. He's dressed in his usual worn robe, as if he mistook the event for an exorcism rather than a soiree. The Countess, being a good hostess, offers him champagne. He declines, asking instead for a small bowl of jam. No one knows what to do with that request. A servant scurries off. Rasputin takes a seat on a velvet chair, sticky jam in hand, and starts talking about sin. Not loudly, not aggressively, but intimately, as if he's picking the sin out of each person's coat pocket. He speaks about the beauty of repentance, how only through falling can one rise, how God loves the broken best, and everyone listens, wide-eyed, unsure whether to confess or bolt. It's this dual nature, saint and showman, that makes Rasputin such a bizarre fit in these circles. He speaks with the cadence of a priest, but the timing of a cabaret performer. He doesn't tell people what they want to hear. He tells them what they're already afraid of. And somehow it works. Many of the aristocrats who mock him in public invite him back in private. They bring their anxieties to him like dogs in need of taming. A sick child, a failing marriage, a string of nightmares. Rasputin listens, sometimes prays, sometimes just holds a hand for a long, uncomfortable time. That's part of the magic. He doesn't fix the problem so much as absorb it. One general's wife insists he cured her insomnia by singing softly in Old Church Slavonic at her bedside. Another lady swears he stopped her husband's infidelity, though it's never confirmed whether the husband knew he was supposed to stop. But even as Rasputin becomes a spiritual advisor to the elite, the rumors keep piling up like logs before a bonfire. They say he has a secret list of sins from every noble family in the city. They say he uses it to manipulate the court. They say he walks in his sleep, floats above carpets, controls minds with a blink. One fringe tale, definitely fringe, definitely unconfirmed, claims he once kissed a mirror and it wept. And through it all, he smiles that slow, half-ironic smile. The one that seems to say, maybe I did, maybe I didn't, maybe you dreamed it all. Some believe his hypnotic eyes are to blame. They describe them as gray, then green, then black. No 2 accounts agree. One observer calls them wolf eyes. Another says they're like looking into a deep lake where something moves just beneath the surface. Whatever their color, people often report forgetting their own thoughts after a few seconds under his gaze. And while Rasputin's mystique is spreading through St. Petersburg like the smell of boiled cabbage, his influence over the Romanovs continues to solidify. Alexandra writes him almost daily. She shares court gossip, political concerns, her endless maternal worry. He replies with riddles, religious metaphors, and advice that's sometimes helpful, sometimes tomato-based. One surviving letter includes a line that reads, "Like the tomato, your heart must ripen slowly or it will burst." Interpret that however you like. But Rasputin's relationship with Nicholas II is colder. The Tsar doesn't share his wife's seal. He tolerates Rasputin but rarely consults him. He seems uneasy, respectful but distant, like a man watching someone pet his bear and wondering if it's going to bite. The Tsar's unease mirrors the rising tension in the empire. Russia is groaning under the strain of war, food shortages, labor strikes, military losses, and here's Rasputin, unofficial, unwashed, and unwavering, whispering at the ear of a woman many now blame for the country's woes. And it's not just politics anymore. Scandals bloom like frost on windows. People claim Rasputin is having affairs with court ladies, with chambermaids, with nuns, with the Empress herself. Nothing is confirmed, but nothing is ever fully denied either. The palace stays silent. The newspapers do not. Some print caricatures of Rasputin as a leering octopus, arms wrapped around the empire. Others refer to him simply as the Dark One. More moderate publications merely suggest he has undue influence over certain maternal sensitivities in the palace, which is a polite way of saying Alexandra trusts him more than she probably should. And yet he thrives. Despite the rumors, despite the rage, despite every effort to contain his presence, Rasputin remains, like a crack in fine porcelain, barely visible at first, then impossible to ignore. In one odd episode, he's invited to a small noble gathering at a country estate. He arrives late, mud on his boots, hair matted from the rain. The host tries to mock him in front of the guests. Rasputin says nothing, just walks to the host's wife and says, "You should be kinder to your dog." Everyone laughs, except the wife, who turns pale, no one knows why. Another night, at a gala, a famous dancer challenges Rasputin to a debate on morality. She quotes Voltaire, he quotes the Psalms, then he leans close and says, "I know what you dream about." She leaves early. Whether it's psychological insight, lucky guesses, or divine inspiration, Rasputin seems to know how to cut straight to people's softest points. He's a master of spiritual judo, using his opponent's own weight against them. Still, the tide is shifting. Within the court, voices grow louder. Ministers beg the Tsar to remove Rasputin. Church leaders write letters. Even members of the Romanov family begin to raise eyebrows. They warn that if Rasputin remains so close to the throne, it will crack under the weight of his shadow. Nicholas does what he often does, nothing. And Rasputin continues to drift through corridors of silk and steel, brushing past suspicion like a man walking through fog. He has no title, no land, no army, just jam, boots, and eyes that see everything. The Empress sits in her private quarters, rosary beads in hand, a half-written letter to Rasputin resting on her desk. Outside, the wind claws at the windows like a beggar looking for warmth. The palace is quiet, but not peaceful. Every ticking clock and shifting shadow seems to whisper the same name, Rasputin. Alexandra's devotion to him has by now moved beyond admiration. It has become belief, a kind of reverent certainty that his prayers hold power, that his presence wards off doom, that his voice is the echo of divine will. She doesn't see a peasant in a robe. She sees an emissary sent from heaven to protect her son, her husband, and Russia itself. Of course, not everyone agrees. The imperial court is a powder keg of tension. Ministers sneer at the mere mention of Rasputin. Servants trade whispers like currency. Even family members of the Romanovs are privately appalled. They believe Alexandra has slipped into delusion, and Rasputin is the lead actor in her tragic play. Still, Alexandra writes him daily, sometimes twice. Her notes read like emotional lifelines, full of longing and religious overtones. Our friend, she calls him, never Grigori, never Father Rasputin, always our friend, as if giving him a formal title forged in the furnace of desperation. Rasputin, for his part, returns these letters with messages of reassurance. He signs them with crosses and tearful blessings. Some notes are cryptic, others oddly tender. Once he writes, My soul walks beside you like a second shadow. God sees, and so I see. It's not clear if Alexandra sees him as a father, a prophet, or something softer and stranger. Historians still argue whether their bond was purely spiritual or emotionally intimate in a way that defies labels. There's no solid proof of romance, just a fire made of words and worry. Meanwhile, the Russian people are growing less patient. It's hard to be moved by divine whispers when bread lines stretch around corners and funerals outnumber baptisms. The empire is bleeding, economically, spiritually, and literally, and rumors that Rasputin holds sway over the empress have become more than idle gossip. They've become the stuff of conspiracy and rage. The idea that this grimy mystic, with his long beard and questionable posture, is making decisions about ministers, military leaders, or war policy. Unthinkable to some, all too believable to others. And then comes the hemophilia episode that changes everything. Alexei, the heir to the throne, suffers a severe internal bleed during a family trip to their hunting estate in Spala, Poland. He's in agony, his legs swollen, his pulse erratic. The doctors prepare Alexandra for the worst. The Tsar's face remains pale and unreadable. Desperate, Alexandra sends a telegram to Rasputin, who is far away in Siberia. Rasputin replies immediately. His message is brief. God has seen your tears. The little one will not die. Do not let the doctors upset him. He will rest. And then, the boy improves. Whether it's coincidence, a natural easing of symptoms, or something stranger, Alexei begins to recover. The swelling subsides. The fever breaks. The doctors are baffled. Alexandra weeps. Nicholas, rattled but reserved, makes no public comment. But for Alexandra, it's proof. Absolute, unshakable proof. Rasputin has been chosen. He is not merely helpful. He is sacred. A holy man bound to their family's fate by threads too fine for anyone else to see. She doubles down. She asks Rasputin's opinion on government appointments. She uses his phrases in her letters to ministers. She begins to channel his worldview, suspicious of anyone not pure in heart. Cabinet reshuffles become more frequent and more chaotic. Dismissals and promotions come with no explanation, only the sense that someone has been judged and found lacking by an invisible hand. This growing influence earns Rasputin more enemies. One of the most vocal is Grand Duke Nikolai Nikolaevich, a respected military commander who despises Rasputin with a passion only aristocrats can summon. He once reportedly threatened to hang Rasputin if he ever came near the army headquarters. Rasputin's reply? A shrug and a whispered prayer for the Grand Duke's soul. Still, Rasputin is not immune to pressure. As the accusations mount, he retreats more often to his home, a modest apartment with thick drapes, worn rugs, and a kitchen that smells perpetually of stew and old candles. He receives visitors there, some bringing gifts, others just seeking peace. It becomes a kind of unofficial chapel for the confused and elite. And not everyone who enters leaves with admiration. Some describe the place as oppressive. They say the air feels heavy, that Rasputin rarely lights more than a few candles at a time. One woman says she felt her thoughts slipping sideways while in his presence. Another claims he told her the date of her death, then recanted when she began to cry. His behavior grows more erratic, especially in public. There are reports of him drinking heavily, sometimes to the point of collapse. One account has him shouting about God's mercy while staggering through a tavern with soup in his beard. Another describes him dancing in the snow at midnight, alone, arms raised to the stars. But always he returns to the palace. Always the Empress forgives. It's worth noting that Rasputin never lives lavishly. For all his influence, he doesn't collect wealth like others might. He gives away gifts. He helps poor families pay rent. He walks instead of riding. If he wanted to be a millionaire mystic, he's going about it all wrong. Instead, he seems to thrive on emotion. Praise and hatred are both fuel. He absorbs them, processes them, returns them in strange little packages wrapped in scripture and sarcasm. One bizarre detail from this time: Rasputin begins to predict his own death. He tells Alexandra in a letter, "If I die at the hands of common men, your throne will stand. But if it is your nobles who spill my blood, Russia will fall, and you with it." A melodramatic warning? Sure, but it will haunt her in the months to come. Because while Alexandra clings to Rasputin tighter than ever, The walls are closing in. Politicians, clergy, even members of the royal family begin to plot. They whisper of purity, of stability, of the need to cut out the infection. They speak in euphemisms, but their meaning is clear. Rasputin must be removed. He knows it, he senses it, perhaps even accepts it, but he continues to walk the marble halls with quiet confidence. His boots echo across polished floors. His scent lingers in rooms long after he's gone. The palace grows colder, the shadows deeper, and somewhere in the gloom, Rasputin prays, not for safety, but for Russia. The room is dim, the air thick with incense and anxious silence. Rasputin sits cross-legged, eyes closed, fingers twitching ever so slightly as if plucking invisible threads from the air. He's not speaking, not quite, just murmuring, half prayer, half monologue, the kind of sound that might lull you to sleep or pull you into a trance, depending on your blood sugar and belief system. This is the man that Tsarina trusts with her son's life. And as strange as it seems, Rasputin's most controversial claim to power isn't court manipulation or whispered appointments, it's healing. Not just metaphorical healing either, actual physical healing. Most famously of Alexei, the young heir to the Russian throne, a boy wrapped in silks and shadows, his blood too fragile for the world he's meant to inherit. Hemophilia haunts every step he takes. A stubbed toe or minor bump could mean internal bleeding. Screams, panic, blood pooled inside tiny joints like a royal death sentence waiting to be activated. And yet, when Rasputin is near, the boy often improves. No medicine, no surgery, just words, prayers, calmness. Historians still argue whether Rasputin's healing was real or rooted in something more explainable. Some theorize that he used hypnotic suggestion, primitive perhaps, but effective. Others point to the placebo effect, or the very practical fact that Rasputin always insisted the boy rest and stay away from doctors' leech-happy methods, which might have saved him from further harm. It's even been suggested that Rasputin's presence lowered Alexei's blood pressure, slowing bleeding and easing pain. A mystical monk by reputation, but maybe just an intuitive caregiver with freakishly good timing. Still, in the eyes of the Empress, there's no debate. It's a miracle. There's one particularly intense episode that seals the myth forever. It's late, the palace lit only by candles and dread. Alexei is screaming, his body twisted with pain after a carriage jolt dislodged something inside him. The doctors are helpless. Alexandra is in tears. She sends a frantic telegram to Rasputin, who is miles away. He replies, "Do not fear, God sees your sorrow. The little one will not die." And, like a poorly timed plot twist, the boy begins to recover. The fever breaks. The pain eases. Within days, he's sitting up in bed. Coincidence? Maybe. Divine intervention? Depends on who you ask. But from that moment on, the Empress is a disciple. Rasputin becomes Alexei's unofficial guardian angel. His visits are now expected whenever the boy is ill. His advice is treated like medical scripture, and his prayers, no matter how odd or mumbled, become more sacred than anything prescribed in a hospital. There's something undeniably dramatic about Rasputin's healing sessions. He never made them sterile or scientific. There were no instruments, no measuring tapes, just eyes, voice, presence. He'd sit beside the boy, often holding his hand or laying a palm on his forehead, and whisper things like, "Be still, little Tsar. The pain will leave you like smoke from a fire." Sometimes he sang, not hymns exactly, something older, rawer, perhaps from deep Siberian folk rituals, chant-like tones that filled the room like fog. Occasionally, his treatments included instructions for Alexandra. Burn this shirt, say this prayer, don't let doctors give him anything for 2 days. Strangely, those instructions often aligned with periods of recovery. Even modern scientists, with their data and double-blind studies, admit that stress and fear can worsen bleeding in hemophilia. A calm mind, a soft room, a steady hand, these could do far more than early 20th century Russian medicine ever could. But Rasputin doesn't just help with physical pain. He soothes the Empress's soul. She's isolated, worried sick, and increasingly disconnected from the world outside the palace. Every visit from Rasputin, every note, every whispered assurance becomes a balm. She leans on him spiritually, emotionally, and increasingly politically. It's a dangerous combination, because now Rasputin's healing isn't just saving a boy, it's shaping an empire. One curious detail: during particularly severe episodes of Alexei's illness, Rasputin would often instruct everyone to leave the room except for himself and the Empress. Sometimes even Alexandra was asked to wait outside. No one knows exactly what occurred in those sacred silences, but afterward the boy would sleep peacefully. Servants swore they heard singing through the walls. Other times, Rasputin simply sat beside the boy for hours, doing nothing at all, just watching, waiting, breathing slowly. His calmness, oddly contagious. There are letters from Alexandra during this period that read more like prayers than correspondence. "Thank you for calming my soul. Your presence brings light even when all around is black." She writes with the intensity of a mother clinging to hope, a woman drowning in grief, and a ruler trying to convince herself she still has control. And Rasputin, he returns her faith with messages of divine affirmation. He tells her the boy will live, that Russia will endure, that her enemies are like dry reeds in the wind, loud but easy to snap. In public, Rasputin begins to take on the mantle of a holy man with more confidence. He's seen blessing children in the streets. He kisses icons in churches with dramatic reverence. He holds impromptu prayer gatherings, sometimes in gardens, sometimes in the foyers of noble homes. The gatherings always include emotion, always include tears, sometimes include cake. One odd anecdote: Rasputin once told a boy with a twisted ankle to stomp it 3 times in a circle while singing "Christ is risen." The boy did. Allegedly walked normally the next day. It might have been adrenaline, or just a bad sprain, but to the people who watched, it was holy. Still, not everyone's buying it. The doctors, in particular, begin to bristle. They aren't fans of being sidelined by a peasant in boots who doesn't understand anatomy but somehow gets better results than they do. One physician reportedly grumbled, "He heals with his nonsense. I, meanwhile, have a degree." And in the larger court, Rasputin's increasing influence starts to trigger alarm bells. They believe his bond with Alexandra, his involvement in state affairs, and his messianic aura are dangerous, especially with a war on and revolution brewing in every breadline and factory. But Alexandra doesn't care. She writes again and again, "Only you understand, only you speak truth, only you can help my boy." That's not faith anymore, that's dependence, and Rasputin knows it. In his more private moments, he grows reflective. Some witnesses say he seemed to age faster during this period, that the long hours, the emotional weight, and the constant threat of assassination took a visible toll. He wrote once, "I am but a candle burning in a room full of wind." But he keeps showing up, keeps praying, keeps healing, or at least trying, because something else is starting to flicker in the edges of his reputation, something darker. Even the Tsarevich's healings can't completely shield him from the rumors anymore. People begin to question whether the miracles are real or rehearsed, whether the man from Pokrovskoye is prophet or puppet master, and whether, perhaps, Russia's guardian angel has begun to cast a very long shadow. The sun barely rises over St. Petersburg these days. Everything is gray: sky, snow, faces. Inside salons and smoky tea rooms, one name keeps returning like an unpaid debt: Rasputin. His miracles are the stuff of legend, his influence at court undeniable. But what really fuels the empire's obsession is not what he does, it's what people think he's doing. Rumors cling to him like frost on a window pane. They're whispered behind fans, carved into satirical pamphlets, and poured over by diplomats like fortune tellers reading tea leaves. At first it's gossip about healings, about visions, but soon the tales grow steamier, stranger, far less saintly. People start asking if the monk with the greasy hair and hypnotic eyes might be sleeping with the Empress. The idea is as scandalous as it is compelling. Alexandra, the foreign-born Empress, is already unpopular. Her devotion to Rasputin has alienated half the nobility. Her reserve, once seen as dignity, now reads as arrogance. And her spiritual fervor, stoked by Rasputin's frequent letters and blessings, now looks like obsession to outsiders. It doesn't help that she constantly defends him, in public, in private, even when his behavior becomes impossible to ignore, like the time he was seen drunk at a restaurant, shouting at a waiter for forgetting his bread, or the night he reportedly chased a lady-in-waiting through the Winter Palace garden, shouting, You need spiritual cleansing. Whether true or invented, the story spread fast. And while Rasputin remains untouchable at court, the rest of Russian society is less forgiving. The aristocracy rolls its collective eyes. The newspapers, newly emboldened, begin printing articles hinting at moral depravity, court corruption, and Rasputin's suspicious hold over the throne. Cartoons depict him in compromising positions, cuddling with the blushing empress, puppeteering the Tsar like a marionette, lounging in the royal bathtub. They exaggerate his features, huge eyes, wild beard, long fingers, until he looks more demon than man. And people believe it, even those who don't want to, because it feels true, not in the fact-checked sense, but in the deeper gut-twisting way. Something in Rasputin's odd behavior, his refusal to play by society's rules, and his infuriating calm in the face of scandal. It all just seems off. Historians still argue whether Rasputin truly had sexual affairs with the women of the court. There's no solid evidence, just whispers, a trail of curious encounters, and too many stories that start with, "He came to bless me," and then, one such tale involves a noblewoman who invited Rasputin to pray over her ailing daughter. He agreed, but only if the room was lit by a single candle and the door locked. No one knows what happened inside, but afterward, the mother asked her driver to take her straight to the church for confession. Another rumor, Rasputin insisted that one could only be healed by passing through sin. Interpret that however you like. Many people did. To make matters murkier, Rasputin never denied these rumors with any real urgency. If asked directly, he'd smile and say something like, "God sees the heart, let the dogs bark." Not exactly the most reassuring response. What's more, he begins surrounding himself with an entourage of young women. Devotees, mostly. They attend his gatherings, follow him on his long walks through the city, even wait outside his apartment for hours in the snow just to glimpse him. To outsiders, it looks like a cult. To his followers, it's salvation. He calls them little doves. They call him Father. And behind closed doors, people wonder what exactly those prayers involve. Meanwhile, Alexandra continues to shield him. Every accusation, every scandal is dismissed as jealousy. She insists he is pure, misunderstood, holy. The Empress begins fighting with ministers, bishops, even family members over Rasputin. She demands that editors be punished for publishing slander. She writes long, tear-stained letters to Nicholas, urging him to trust our friend over the snakes at court. One such letter reads, "You and baby need him. Don't listen to the enemies of light. They circle like wolves, but they know not his power. His soul is white as snow," which is touching and also terrifying, because Rasputin now exists in two dimensions, the man and the myth. The man wears threadbare robes, drinks too much, and frequently mutters to pigeons in the park. The myth can heal, predict the future, and seduce duchesses with a glance. And both of them, man and myth, have their fingers in the workings of a crumbling empire. One of the more bizarre details to surface, Rasputin reportedly began giving women spiritual advice during baths. He claimed water carried divine energy, and that to cleanse the soul, one had to be fully immersed, sometimes with assistance. No comment. Despite all this, or perhaps because of it, his popularity grows in certain circles. There's a weird sort of reverse appeal to Rasputin. The more scandalous the stories, the more mystique he seems to gather. Like a spiritual rock star whose concerts are half exorcism, half burlesque. One fringe tidbit from this era, Rasputin is said to have kept a box of hair clippings from his followers. Not from the head, take a wild guess. He calls it a collection of sins. Again, no comment, but let's not lose the thread entirely. Amid the rumors, Rasputin is still doing what he's always done, praying over the Tsarevich, calming Alexandra, slipping into and out of palaces with a look of mild boredom and divine certainty. His letters are still full of blessings and vague predictions. He still signs them with little crosses like spiritual kisses. He still insists that Russia must suffer to be reborn, and the Empress still believes he's the only one keeping her son alive. She won't hear a word against him, not from ministers, nor generals, nor even the Tsar's cousins. One duchess dares to suggest Rasputin be sent away, just for a while. Alexandra doesn't speak to her again for 3 months. This stubborn loyalty only deepens the conspiracy theories. People begin to ask, if Rasputin is this close to the Empress, is he also steering the ship? Is he advising on war, on domestic policy, on which generals live or die? No one knows, but it's easier to believe that Russia's pain stems from one man's whisper than from the rot in its foundation. And so Rasputin becomes the scapegoat, the symbol, the curse. Even if none of it is true, even if all of it is, in drawing rooms across the capital, teacups clink and fingers point. The holy man, the fraud, the lover, the puppet master, call him what you want. He just walks on, boots creaking over carpet, eyes half lidded with the weight of mysteries he'll never explain. And outside, in the streets of the empire, the people grow hungry. The bread is gone, but the gossip never ends. Snow clings to the rooftops like dust on old velvet. Inside St. Petersburg's salons, the whispers have turned into accusations. But Rasputin? He just keeps going. He drinks, he prays, he lays hands on the sick. Sometimes he stumbles out of a brothel and into a church without changing his pace. And in between moments of repentance and indulgence, he reminds people, through actions and that slow, knowing smile, that spiritual paths aren't always clean. The contradictions pile up like logs in a Russian stove. Rasputin, the man with healing hands, also parties until dawn. The man who cries during prayers also dances in taverns, sings lewd folk songs, and sometimes needs help standing up. His public life is a blend of saintliness and scandal, vodka and visions. And yet, people keep coming, especially women. They arrive at his home in shawls and furs, eyes wide with equal parts desperation and devotion. They call him Father Grigori, bring gifts, beg for blessings. Some want healing, some want comfort, some want something they can't name but believe he can offer. His living quarters, cramped, smoky, always half lit, become a revolving door of spiritual seekers. There are candles on every surface, holy icons, a heavy air of incense and boiled cabbage. The walls feel too close, as if the space is holding its breath. And Rasputin, in the middle of it all, hums a tune no one else can hear. The sessions aren't always dramatic. Sometimes it's just quiet. A prayer whispered over a shaking hand, a tear brushed from someone's cheek. Other times they become intense. The emotional unraveling that happens when belief meets exhaustion. Women weep, fall to their knees, speak in tongues, or what they think are tongues. He listens, patient as an old dog. He offers riddles instead of answers. Sometimes he quotes scripture, sometimes he tells a fable about wolves or forests or beets. The line between spiritual counsel and performative confusion is blurry. On purpose, probably. A recurring phrase of his, one must fall to rise. And fall they do. There are reports of him blessing followers in private rooms. Some say it involved nothing more than prayer and a touch on the forehead. Others claim more. One former devotee described her encounter as a journey from shame to grace and refused to elaborate. Another said she left feeling both clean and corrupted, a contradiction that somehow made perfect sense at the time. At the same time, Rasputin becomes increasingly bold. He walks into dinner parties uninvited. When servants try to stop him, he simply smiles and says, "I've been expected." And somehow, no one argues. At one such event, an intimate evening for high-ranking military wives, he sits at the head of the table before the host even enters the room. When questioned, he says, God puts whom he chooses at the table's head, and then he starts slicing bread like he owns the place. His behavior gets stranger the more secure he feels. He begins talking openly about his visions, dark dreams filled with blood and fire. He warns of a coming storm, of betrayal, of Russia weeping in the streets. Sometimes he laughs after saying these things, as if he knows the punchline of a joke no one else wants to hear. And yet, he still makes people feel safe. It's the paradox that fuels his following. Despite the rumors, despite the scandal, despite the smell of old garlic and a lifestyle held together by prayer and poor impulse control, people believe in him, because Rasputin, for all his wildness, makes people feel. And in a world increasingly cold, uncertain, and mechanical, feeling anything at all is a kind of miracle. Some of his most loyal followers are older noblewomen who've lost children, husbands, fortunes. They see in Rasputin a conduit to something purer than social rank or church hierarchy. He makes them cry, he makes them laugh, he tells them, "You are not alone," and somehow they believe it. He also has peculiar habits. One of the more peculiar, he likes to bathe in cold water while shouting scripture, not whispering, shouting, loudly. The neighbors complain, but who wants to be the one to tell Rasputin to keep it down? He also eats raw onions like apples, claims they keep him spiritually clean, and he once reportedly fasted for 4 days straight, during which he claimed to have spoken to St. John the Baptist and a goat. Whether metaphorical or literal, no one ever confirmed. Meanwhile, the Empress continues to treat him as her confessor, her advisor, her link to divine protection. She sends him fine fabrics and religious icons. He sends her letters full of veiled warnings and fatherly concern. He still refers to Alexei as the little one and calls Nicholas the quiet man. It's affectionate. It's unsettling. There's even a running joke at court, never said too loudly, that Rasputin has more influence over Alexandra than any prime minister has over Nicholas. But some of Rasputin's blessings raise serious eyebrows. One particularly juicy account comes from a minor countess who claims that Rasputin laid his hand on her chest, inside her blouse, and told her she had a heart crowded with doubt. She reportedly thanked him afterward. Whether that's gratitude or trauma cloaked in reverence is, frankly, hard to say. Another time, he tells a woman who confesses to an affair that she must burn the soul in holy fire, then hands her a candle and instructs her to walk barefoot in a circle, reciting a prayer about lilies. She later claims she felt lighter. He doesn't always demand obedience, but when he does, it often comes wrapped in strange rituals and hypnotic authority, and so the stories multiply. Some see a healer, others see a predator. A few claim he's both. Historians still argue whether Rasputin used his influence to prey on vulnerable women, or whether the rumors were part of a smear campaign orchestrated by a nobility terrified of his peasant power. As always, the truth seems to live somewhere in the gray fog between fact and folklore. And Rasputin, he doesn't flinch. He continues visiting the homes of grieving mothers and wayward daughters. He continues dancing in dim rooms with spinning candles. He continues offering salvation to anyone willing to believe, and willing to ignore the occasional contradiction. Because Rasputin is not clean, he is not neat, he is not respectable, but he is, in a way, irresistible. To the lonely, he's a voice in the dark. To the frightened, he's a fire in the snow. To the guilty, he's a way out that doesn't require leaving the room. And that, more than any miracle or manipulation, is why he remains. For now. The printing presses click late into the night. Ink dries on biting headlines. The names change, wars, treaties, tsars, but one face keeps appearing in caricatures and columns alike. Rasputin. To the Russian press, he's a godsend and a goldmine. Every whisper, every scandal, every dinner party mishap involving the Mad Monk becomes public property within 24 hours, and the public, angry and hungry, eats it up like black bread after a long fast. It's the golden age of Rasputin gossip, and no one's holding back. At first, it's the underground newspapers, then it's the tabloids, then it's the mainstream political journals. All are drawn to the same image, a filthy peasant with snake eyes and hypnotic powers, seducing the empress, steering the empire, and feasting on fine meats while workers starve in the streets. Truth matters little. What matters is that Rasputin represents everything wrong with Russia in one oily package. He's the symbol of a rotten court, of a monarchy out of touch, of divine right corrupted by dirt. One cartoon shows Rasputin with tentacles instead of arms, wrapped around Alexandra and the throne. Another depicts him rising from a pit of fire while the royal family dances around him in chains. A satirical poem describes him as beard of the devil, breath of vodka, eyes of sin. Not exactly subtle. And Rasputin? He reads them. He laughs. He crumples them up and tosses them into the stove, mumbling something about the jealousy of fools. Occasionally, he even keeps a clipping or two, taped onto the wall near his bedside, next to icons and candle wax. A strange shrine to his own infamy. But the press doesn't stop. The more outrageous the claim, the more popular the paper. And with censorship loosening and the monarchy weakening, editors grow bolder. They publish anonymous testimonies, a maid's night with Rasputin, the monk and the countess, a bedtime blessing. They hint at orgies, at seances gone wrong, at political manipulation disguised as healing. And the people believe it. Because in a collapsing empire, disbelief is a luxury. The streets are filled with lines for bread and rumors of defeat. The war is going badly. Casualties climb. And while the Tsareva remains distant, while the Empress sends increasingly erratic orders from the palace, Rasputin strolls across the capital like a holy drunkard. One fringe anecdote makes it to print, that Rasputin, in a haze of wine and prophecy, blessed a fish in a restaurant and then refused to let anyone eat it. The fish, he said, held a secret. The waiter, reportedly, quit the next day. Was it true? Who knows? The point is, the line between journalism and folklore has dissolved. Rasputin is now a tabloid creature, a living legend. Everything he does feeds the machine. And his enemies, they're taking notes. Political opponents, already suspicious of his access to the royal family, now find their justification in the headlines. If even half of what's printed is true, they argue, then the empire is being puppeteered by a madman with mud on his boots and wine on his breath. One minister famously lamented, "We are governed not by law or logic, but by letters scribbled by a lunatic in the dark." The clergy joins the chorus. Conservative bishops denounce him as heretical. They accuse him of false prophecy, of blasphemous acts, of seducing the faithful away from proper orthodoxy. Some even claim he's possessed. Rasputin does little to defend himself. He gives no interviews, no formal rebuttals. He simply continues, blessing, praying, staggering through the city with a half smile and that ever-watchful gaze. He says, "Let them bark, I belong to God." But the public isn't barking anymore. They're howling. The image of Rasputin in Alexandria, regardless of truth, becomes a lightning rod for revolutionary anger. Protesters shout their names at rallies. Flyers claim the Empress is a German spy, with Rasputin as her demonic handler. When bread riots break out, some hold signs that say, "Down with the German and her devil." It's not just hysteria, it's political fire. And back at the palace, Alexandra hunkers down. She blames the chaos on Rasputin's enemies, on jealous ministers, on weak men who don't understand true faith. She writes to Nicholas, now away at the front lines of war, urging him to trust our friend and ignore the slander. One letter reads, "Do not listen to those who fear the light. They gnash their teeth at holiness." Nicholas, as usual, hesitates. He dislikes the press coverage. He worries about Rasputin's reputation, but he also fears his wife's disapproval and her breakdown should anything happen to Alexei. The boy's health, after all, remains tied in Alexandra's mind to Rasputin's prayers, and no one, not even the Tsar, dares sever that link. So Rasputin stays, and the press keeps printing. One paper claims he has a private tunnel into the Empress's bedroom. Another that he's purchased land in the Caucasus with money funneled from the state treasury. A third declares he can resurrect the dead, but only if they were buried facing east. Some of these reports are later retracted, many are not. And Rasputin? He begins to embrace the madness. He jokes with friends about his harem. He tells strangers on the street, "Careful or I'll hypnotize you too." He even signs a note to a bishop with, "From the devil's beard, with love." This isn't damage control. This is Rasputin taking the scandal, chewing it, and spitting it back as legend. One evening, he's spotted in a restaurant raising a toast. "To the whores, the sinners, and the saints, may we all meet again in God's kitchen." His guests laugh, the waiter does not. It's around this time that a curious phrase begins circulating, Rasputin's Russia. It's meant as a joke, of course, but the subtext is serious. The perception is no longer that Rasputin is merely influencing the royal family. It's that he owns them. And when perception becomes belief, history shifts. The press continues its campaign, sometimes brave, sometimes reckless. They print letters, real or forged, that suggest Alexandra defers to Rasputin on everything from cabinet appointments to tea blends. They allege that he has dictated war strategy, exiled generals, and replaced priests with his disciples. There's even a poem that circulates in underground circles. The Empress weeps, the monk commands, the Tsar obeys with trembling hands. Russia bleeds beneath the moon, and prays the madman leaves us soon. The public eats it up, and behind closed doors, the nobles begin to whisper not just of scandal, but of solutions. But Rasputin, he keeps blessing strangers in the street, wobbling down alleys at odd hours and writing letters full of crosses and cryptic hope. Because while the press has made him a monster, he believes he's something else, a servant of God, and perhaps, if only in his own eyes, the only man truly willing to walk through the flames with a smile. Snow falls steadily over St. Petersburg, softening rooftops, disguising the rot beneath its white hush. Inside the palatial halls of the Russian aristocracy, however, the cold is not so gentle. The atmosphere is curdled. Rasputin's name no longer provokes curiosity, it sparks fury. Whispers turn into plots. Among the nobility, especially those close to the Romanov family, but increasingly horrified by Rasputin's influence, a consensus begins to form. This man is dangerous. He must be removed, not rebuked, not exiled, not shamed. Removed. Silken gloves mask clenched fists. Toasts to the Tsar are made with barely concealed rage. One prince scribbles in his diary, "The empire is bleeding, and the empress listens to no one but that peasant demon. It is he who wears the crown in all but name." And it's not just paranoia. By now, Rasputin has been linked, accurately or otherwise, to multiple cabinet changes, church appointments, and military decisions. Ministers are fired, generals reassigned, and priests elevated at his suggestion. He claims to care nothing for politics, and yet politics bends beneath his presence. One minister, after being dismissed, reportedly muttered, "I served the Tsar for 20 years. He served Rasputin for 2 months, and that was enough." It becomes clear to many that Rasputin is more than a threat to decorum. He's a threat to the empire's survival. Among the most furious, Prince Felix Yusupov. He's young, fabulously wealthy, and married to the Tsar's niece. He's also eccentric, a fan of costume parties, spiritual experimentation, and dramatic gestures. But beneath the silk and eyeliner lies a mind sharpening toward vengeance. Yusupov is joined by Grand Duke Dmitry Pavlovich, another Romanov, and a few key military and political men who, despite their differences, share a singular goal: end Rasputin and perhaps save the empire. They begin to meet in secret, in drawing rooms behind closed doors, in back gardens under lantern light, over 2 strong vodka and the weight of their own desperation. Their discussions are not theoretical. They do not consider exposure, scandal, or exile. They speak plainly. Rasputin must die, and he must die in a way that sends a message, not just to Alexandria, not just to the press, but to Russia itself. The man who wouldn't leave must be erased. What makes this all the more surreal is that, above their plotting, Rasputin continues as always. He walks the streets in a daze, blessing the sick, waving to strangers, and inviting suspicion with every sideways glance and slurred sermon. He has no bodyguards, no entourage, just an air of invincibility that drives his enemies mad. And the palace? Silent. Nicholas is still away at the front. Alexandra continues her blind devotion. She dismisses warnings, refuses security suggestions, and insists our friend is under God's protection. But even Rasputin begins to feel something shift. He starts writing darker letters, more urgent, more paranoid. One to Alexandra includes the line, "They circle me like wolves at night, but I do not fear. The Lord's fire is in my belly." To his friends, he mentions dreams of blood and snow. He says things like, "The knife is near, but the spirit stands taller." People dismiss it as dramatic flair, but Rasputin, odd as he is, has never been known for meaningless drama. He knows something's coming, and yet he does not retreat, he does not run. In fact, he seems more determined than ever to keep moving forward, perhaps because he believes in his own divine protection, or perhaps because he understands what every martyr eventually knows. If they kill you, they confirm your power. Meanwhile, the conspirators finalize their plan. The location, Yusupov's palace, a grand home on the Moika River. The bait, Yusupov himself, posing as a repentant noble, desperate for a personal blessing, and a private meeting. The weapon? Well, multiple, just to be sure. They begin collecting poison, cyanide, to be precise, enough to fell a horse. They embed it into cakes and wine, and just in case that fails, they have revolvers and clubs ready nearby. Because if there's one thing everyone can agree on, it's that Rasputin is hard to kill. A fringe, but deliciously eerie tidbit. One of the conspirators insists on wearing gloves made from deer hide, claiming Rasputin's death will taint anyone who touches him with bare hands. The irony? They'll need far more than gloves. Back in Rasputin's world, the days march on. He writes to Alexandra with warmth and warning. He continues visiting friends, sometimes telling them cryptically, "This body will not last long, but you must not cry. The spirit is stronger." He eats simple meals, drinks too much, smiles at children, sits in the pews of churches as if he belongs there, and perhaps, somehow, does. And the night of reckoning inches closer. One of the more haunting entries from his personal notebook reads, "If I am killed by commoners, the Tsar will rule in peace. If I am killed by nobles, the dynasty will fall within 2 years." It's not just a prophecy, it's a dare. The conspirators by now are restless. Each man carries the weight of not just murder, but meaning. This isn't just about killing Rasputin, it's about restoring order, ending the chaos, sending a message to the Empress and to Russia. The madness must stop. They rehearse the plan in whispers. First poison, then, if necessary, the gun, then the river. Yusupov paces his hallways. Dmitri studies the stars. Another conspirator sharpens his blade, not for stabbing, but just in case. And the whole city holds its breath. Rasputin, in those final days, reportedly smiles more than usual. He walks through snowstorms without flinching. He gives out extra blessings. He writes, "The flesh grows tired, but the heart sings louder. Let the wolves bite. Let them howl." And somewhere beneath the gilded chandeliers and polished marble floors, the plan waits. Not for approval, not for mercy, but for the man himself. Rasputin, the unkillable monk, the peasant prophet who climbed too high, the holy man the empire can no longer tolerate. And in the shadows, silken gloves tighten. The river ice groans under the weight of December. It's 1916 in St. Petersburg, soon to be Petrograd, is quiet but not calm. The city seems to pause, watchful, the air heavy with the kind of stillness that often comes before something permanent happens. And in the Grand Moeka Palace, Prince Felix Yusupov stands in front of a mirror, adjusting his cufflinks, not for vanity, for ceremony. Tonight, he is both host and executioner. The plan has been arranged like a dinner party, which is, depending on your standards, either wildly elegant or deeply deranged. Rasputin is invited under the guise of a late-night meeting with Yusupov's wife, Irina. That's the bait. A woman, a confession, a private appeal for healing, something that would draw Rasputin out of his mystic fog and into a trap. The prince prepares the cellar with what one might call absurd attention to detail. The table is set, wine poured, cakes arranged in a neat little line, all poisoned, cyanide packed into sweets and poured into glasses like a scene from a cursed tea party. And when Rasputin finally arrives just before midnight, he looks as he always does, rumpled, calm, vaguely amused. He seems relaxed, trusting. He's met Yusupov before. Maybe he even senses something is wrong, but he still comes. He removes his coat, settles into the chair in the cold basement salon. The fire crackles. Yusupov makes small talk. A phonograph plays quietly. Some say the tune was Yankee Doodle, which, frankly, is the strangest detail of all. Then Rasputin starts eating. One cake, then another, a sip of wine, another, and nothing happens. The conspirators upstairs begin to panic. Cyanide strong enough to fell a horse, and Rasputin sits there discussing theology and the weather like he's at a garden brunch. Historians still argue whether the poison actually made it into the food. One theory says the sugar in the cakes neutralized the cyanide. Another insists the poison was never added at all. A third, more unsettling theory, that Rasputin was simply too stubborn to die. Yusupov excuses himself, runs upstairs. The other conspirators are waiting. Grand Duke Dmitri Pavlovich, Dr. Stanislaus Lazovert, Purishkevich, and another accomplice or two. The mood is tense. They decide, enough waiting. Yusupov returns to the cellar with a revolver in hand. Rasputin rises to meet him. There's a moment. Some say their eyes lock, others say Rasputin turns away, and then a shot rings out. The bullet hits Rasputin in the chest. He falls, silent. Still, the room holds its breath. Yusupov, overwhelmed, reportedly checks the body, then runs back upstairs in a near panic, shouting, "He's dead! He's dead!" Everyone exhales, but Rasputin isn't dead, not yet. While the conspirators toast their victory and begin planning the body disposal, something unthinkable happens. Rasputin moves. He sits up, then stands. bloodied, wobbling, but alive, according to Yusupov's own account, one that reads more like gothic horror than confession. Rasputin opens his eyes, locks his gaze on the prince, and whispers, "You bad boy." Then he runs, yes, runs, through the basement, up the stairs, out the door, into the snowy courtyard like a wounded animal with a prophecy clenched between his teeth. The conspirators give chase. Purishkevich catches up and fires again. This time, multiple shots. One hits Rasputin in the back. Another, possibly, strikes his head. He falls again, face first in the snow. The body is dragged back inside. Yusupov, in a frenzy, reportedly beats the body with a club. Still unsure, still terrified that somehow, impossibly, Rasputin is only pretending. Eventually, they wrap him in cloth, chain his limbs, tie his hands, then carry the corpse through the night and drop it into the Neva River, beneath a cover of moonlight and frozen fog. A small splash, then silence. Hours pass, the sun rises. The next morning, Rasputin's body is discovered downstream, caught in the ice. When pulled from the water, his arms are still bound, his face marked with bruises and gunshots. A legend spreads quickly, possibly untrue, but too good to ignore, that water is found in his lungs, meaning he didn't die from poison, or bullets, or beatings. He drowned. He was alive when they threw him in. That version of events has never been officially confirmed. The autopsy was rushed, sealed, and later conveniently lost. But the story takes hold like frost on glass, because it fits, because it's terrifying, because it's Rasputin, the man who wouldn't die. That very week, Alexandra receives word of his murder. She collapses in tears. She writes to Nicholas, "They have killed our only friend, the only man who understood." Her grief is profound and very real. She insists on a proper burial. Rasputin is interred in a chapel at Tsarskoye Selo, near the royal family's own residence, a tribute more befitting a prince than a peasant. But his killers are celebrated in certain circles. Yusupov becomes a strange sort of celebrity, half hero, half haunted. He tells his story again and again, each time with more theatrical flair. His memoirs turn Rasputin's death into an operatic scene of fire and blood and salvation. But the celebration is short-lived. The Tsar's fury is quiet but deep. Dmitry Pavlovich is exiled. Others face minor punishments, but the empire is already coming undone. Within months, the revolution begins, and Rasputin's final prophecy begins to echo. "If I am killed by nobles, your family will not last." The empress continues to weep over his loss. She believes the stability of the throne has been broken, and as unrest spreads and war worsens, it becomes clear, removing Rasputin hasn't restored order. It's only removed the last thread holding the curtain together, because whether holy or hellish, Rasputin filled a role no one else could. He was the lightning rod, the scapegoat, the spiritual crutch of a fragile crown, and now he's gone. But his legend, that part is only beginning. The dinner party is over. The cellar is empty. Rasputin's boots, once scuffed and stomping through palaces, are now lost somewhere at the bottom of the river, or tucked away as eerie trophies. His body, frozen, bruised, perhaps waterlogged, is pulled from the icy Neva with the kind of reverence you'd expect for a saint or a serial killer, depending on who you ask. The news of his murder spreads like fire on dry parchment. At first, it's whispered in noble circles, shared behind fans and fur hats. Then the papers get hold of it. Even before the facts are clear, stories spill onto front pages. The mad monk is dead, Rasputin murdered by princes, the Tsarina's devil drowned. And the public? They celebrate. Finally, the man they believed was the cause of all their suffering, Russia's bad luck charm in a robe, is gone. The streets in some parts of Petrograd buzz with a giddy relief. People toast with cheap vodka, curse his name with joy, and gossip about the grisly details. Some say he had to be shot 5 times. Others claim he rose from the dead 3 times. Some swear he cursed his killers with his last breath. A few, always in hushed tones, even suggest he's not dead at all, that somehow Rasputin survived, that he's hiding in the woods, or turned into a raven, or was never really a man to begin with. The autopsy, what little remains of the report, declares that he was shot multiple times, that his body was bruised, battered, and yes, possibly alive when he hit the water. But no one agrees on the cause of death. Even the doctors seem rattled. Was it poison, bullets, drowning? Historians still argue whether the details were exaggerated or suppressed. The truth might have drowned in that river too. What matters is the myth, and in that myth, Rasputin refuses to go quietly. His funeral is held in near secret, attended by Alexandra, a few close confidants, and, of course, the Tsarevich, pale and grieving. The Empress insists he be buried near the royal family, in the grounds of Tsarskoye Selo. Against strong objections, she insists, "He was our friend, he saved our son." A wooden cross is erected, flowers placed, and beneath the frozen earth lies the man who once whispered to empresses, kissed icons with greasy lips, and somehow convinced half of Imperial Russia that he could talk to God. But peace does not last long. Just months later, in 1917, the Russian Revolution explodes like a long-buried mine. The Romanov dynasty, once believed divine and untouchable, collapses in a storm of red flags and rifle fire. Nicholas abdicates. The palace is stormed, crowds chant in the streets, and Alexandra, once so fierce, is imprisoned with her children in a house with no gold, no guards, and no Rasputin. Rasputin's final warning, written in shaky hand, full of apocalyptic certainty, comes back to haunt her. "If I am killed by your nobles, you will not survive. The people will rise, the throne will crumble." She reads it again, and again, and again. It's said she kept the note until the end. During this time, Rasputin's killers do not fare as well as they'd hoped. Yusupov, though exiled, becomes a sort of ironic celebrity. He writes memoirs, gives interviews, poses for portraits like a man who can't decide whether he's proud or permanently haunted. He tells the story of Rasputin's death again and again, each version more theatrical, each detail more colorful. In one, Rasputin looks up after being shot and blesses Yusupov before collapsing. In another, he whispers a final curse. In yet another, he laughs as he sinks into the river. Dmitry Pavlovich, exiled to Persia, fades from the spotlight. Others involved vanish into history or die in obscurity. No one is celebrated for long. And the empire? It unravels. By July 1918, the Romanov family is gone, executed in a basement in Yekaterinburg. No ceremony, no priest, just bullets and silence. And Rasputin's prophecy, scrawled in maddening loops, sits like a cracked bell in the background of history. Some say Alexandra believed Rasputin's death was the first domino, that without him the boy's health failed, her mind weakened, her prayers unanswered, that his murder shattered something sacred. The more superstitious believers whisper that Russia itself, still bruised and tangled in revolution, has never recovered from what it lost in that cellar on the Moika River. And Rasputin's grave? It doesn't last. After the Bolsheviks seize power, they dig him up, not for reburial, for erasure. His corpse, already a ghost in the press and public mind, is thrown into a bonfire behind a building in the countryside. Some reports say he sat upright as the flames caught, that he looked alive. It's probably just the contraction of muscles, but try telling that to a terrified guard at 3 a.m. His ashes vanish, his body disappears. No relics, no official tomb, but the memory, very much alive. Songs are written, books appear. His name becomes shorthand for mysticism, decadence, corruption. A century later, he'll be played by disco dancers and cartoon sorcerers, turned into punchlines and parables. But none of it erases the truth of how he once walked among emperors in dirty boots and told them things they didn't want to hear. He wasn't a noble, he wasn't a general, he wasn't even a priest. He was just a man, possibly mad, possibly miraculous, definitely unforgettable. A man who made the world lean in just to hear what he might say next. And though his body is gone, the legend survives. In ghost stories, in history books, and in every country, every age, that wonders what happens when power listens not to law, not to reason, but to a man who claims to speak for God. Rasputin is gone. The man who once brushed past palace guards and whispered secrets to a queen now lingers only in stories, half truth, half haze. But the echoes of his murder don't fade into some quiet footnote. Instead, they become the beating drum of something far more unhinged, obsession. His death is supposed to be a resolution. It is anything but. In fact, The conspirators may have underestimated just how powerful a martyr Rasputin would become. For starters, his killers, once thinking themselves saviors of Russia, don't quite get the applause they expect. Sure, they're hailed as heroes by certain nobles, those desperate to believe they've righted the course of the sinking monarchy. But even their admirers whisper nervously about the murder's brutality. That night in Yusupov's cellar already feels more like a twisted folktale than a surgical strike. Felix Yusupov is exiled to his estate, not killed, not imprisoned, but politely shuffled out of the city. He brings with him a wardrobe of drama and guilt. Within months, he's retelling the story to anyone who'll listen. But with every retelling, the lines blur further. The poison becomes more potent, the chase more thrilling, the monk more monstrous. It's hard to know if Yusupov is confessing or bragging. He will go on to write 2 memoirs, Lost Splendor and Rasputin, his malignant influence and assassination. In them, he paints Rasputin as a menace so unholy, so hypnotic, that murder wasn't just justified, it was a holy act, a necessary evil, the only way to save the soul of Russia. But here's the rub. By the time the book hits shelves, Russia's soul has already been torn to shreds. Nicholas II, once emperor of all Russia, is living under house arrest. Alexandra is sick with worry and isolation. And the heir, the fragile, sweet Alexei, Rasputin's little one, is growing pale and withdrawn, his health as uncertain as the fate of his family. The conspirators hoped that with Rasputin dead, the empire might return to sanity. What they got instead was revolution. And here's the twist that leaves historians scratching their heads. It's hard to prove that Rasputin actually had any significant political influence at all. Did he offer opinions? Sure. Did Alexandra trust him? Absolutely. But did he single-handedly control ministerial appointments, war strategies, or national policy? Evidence is thin, maybe thinner than Rasputin's own logic. His notes to the Tsarina are often vague, more scripture than strategy. He warns of betrayal, encourages kindness, and occasionally blurts out metaphor-laden advice like, "The tree must bend before the storm, or it will snap like a proud soldier in wet boots." Not exactly actionable intelligence, yet the perception that Rasputin held the reins was stronger than any fact. And perception, especially in a time of war and hunger, has sharp teeth. It's that perception that makes his death both unavoidable and meaningless, because the empire wasn't falling because of Rasputin. It was falling because of war, poverty, inequality, and a royal family increasingly detached from the world burning around them. Rasputin just became the easiest face to blame. Meanwhile, as the revolution builds, Rasputin's story gets stranger in death than it ever was in life. Within weeks of his funeral, peasants begin visiting the spot of his grave. They leave candles, prayers, bits of cloth. One elderly woman is overheard whispering, "He healed my son. I don't care what they say." Another insists she dreamed of him, standing in white robes by the river, smiling. Even after the Bolsheviks exhume and burn his body, the legend refuses to die. If anything, the destruction of his remains just adds fuel to the myth. The story of his corpse, burned and yet allegedly sitting upright in the flames, makes the rounds in hushed bar rooms and crowded kitchens. No one really knows if it happened. No photographs survive. But the image sticks. Rasputin, unbothered by death, watching with smug calm as the fire tries, and fails, to consume him. And then there's the rumor about his severed parts. A particularly colorful legend claims that Rasputin's, masculine artifact was cut off by one of his murderers and smuggled to Paris, where it allegedly spent time on display in a museum of erotica. Is it true? Almost certainly not. But again, truth bows before legend in the Rasputin story. People want him to be more than mortal, to have hypnotic powers, to cheat poison, to rise from bullets, to whisper from beyond the grave. And in a way, he does, because while his body is ash, his name keeps breathing. His image is co-opted by monarchists and mystics, revolutionaries and charlatans. For some, he's a symbol of spiritual endurance, a man who walked with saints and sinners alike. For others, he's the bogeyman of Imperial Russia, proof that faith unmoored from reason can doom an empire. There's a peculiar footnote too. During the early Soviet era, Rasputin's name is briefly censored, then weirdly reclaimed. He's featured in cautionary tales about superstition and backward thinking, but also, weirdly, admired by some for being a peasant who terrified the elite. Even in a regime founded on atheism, Rasputin remains weirdly useful. And internationally, forget it. Rasputin becomes a fixture in pop culture, novels, operas, stage plays, eventually cartoons and rock songs. The real Rasputin, Grigori Yefimovich from Pokrovskoye, is barely recognizable in these stories. He becomes a caricature, a punchline, a boogeyman, a warlock. But the man, he's buried somewhere under the layers of legend and incense and vodka fumes. The father, the wanderer, the barefoot mystic who just wanted to find God on the road and ended up in the Empress's sitting room. He never wanted power, he wanted presence, and for a time, he had it more than anyone else in the Russian Empire. Until the cellar, until the river. And even then, the whispers didn't stop, because sometimes the loudest voice is the one that's gone. The golden double-headed eagle atop the Winter Palace no longer shines the way it used to. Its wings look tired. The sun hits it just the same, but the shimmer feels muted. Rasputin is gone, and in his absence, the house of Romanov doesn't right itself. It collapses. The faith that killing him would restore order turns out to be misplaced. If Rasputin was a disease, then he wasn't the one killing the patient. He was more like a fever, terrible, yes, but just a symptom of a deeper, deadlier infection. And now that he's been cut out, the infection spreads. By March 1917, less than 3 months after Rasputin's body was dumped in the Neva River, Tsar Nicholas II abdicates. Years of war, famine, political mismanagement, and public outrage finally crack the imperial facade. And behind it, just more fragility. The Romanovs are placed under house arrest, first in the Alexander Palace, then eventually in Tobolsk, and finally Yekaterinburg. They are no longer divine, no longer rulers, just a family with nice handwriting and very bad luck. Alexandra, cloaked in black and grief, continues to write. She still speaks of Rasputin, even in confinement. She refers to his letters, quotes him, clings to his prophecy as if it can still offer salvation. One surviving note from her reads, "They did not understand. They laughed at the holy man, and now they drown in blood. He warned us. He knew." Her faith in Rasputin remains as fierce as ever, even as everything else vanishes. Her wealth, her power, her voice, all replaced with the gray monotony of waiting for a pardon, for release, or more likely, for the end. Alexei, the boy who once held an empire in his fragile veins, is visibly weaker. His hemophilia remains as dangerous as ever. Without Rasputin, there's no one left who seems able to calm his body or his mother's nerves. And Nicholas, he fades into quiet resignation. Once emperor of all Russia, now he chops wood and reads French novels, his royal seal packed away in a drawer. He writes in his diary like nothing is wrong. One entry simply reads, "Played dominoes, weather still cold." The Tsar had always been a passive man, but now his passivity becomes his only weapon. He does not protest. He does not fight. He waits, politely, for the verdict of history. And history is not kind. In July 1918, the entire Romanov family is executed in a basement by Bolsheviks. No trial, no ceremony, just a brief, grim flurry of bullets and bayonets. The Empress is shot while clutching an icon. The Tsarevich is killed slowly, agonizingly, his disease making him hard to kill and impossible to save. It's brutal, and it's quiet. No Rasputin to warn them this time. No our friend to send blessings through smoke and ink. Just silence. And somewhere, in the minds of those who still believed, Rasputin's final prophecy sits heavy as iron. If nobles kill me, your family will not last. For some, it becomes a mystical truth, proof that he really did see beyond the veil. For others, it's just a creepy coincidence, nothing more than poetic timing amplified by grief and hindsight. But either way, the myth hardens. Now, not only did Rasputin have power in life, he also had power in death. The tragedy of the Romanovs only adds weight to his legend. He's no longer just a healer, or a drunk, or a manipulator. He's become something bigger, a kind of tragic warning baked into the history of a vanished empire. And the people? Well, they changed their tune faster than a balalaika in a windstorm. The same working-class citizens who once cursed his name now wonder if, perhaps, they misunderstood him. The same aristocrats who laughed at his table manners now wonder if killing him helped speed their own downfall. Even those who mocked the empress for her loyalty begin to question whether she saw something they didn't. In Petrograd, rumors bloom like frost on windows that Rasputin was the last real mystic of old Russia, that his prayers held the empire together, that the Tsarevich's health vanished with him, that the fire of revolution was stoked the moment his body hit the river. In the countryside, peasants tell tales of a wandering holy man who can't be killed. Children are warned that if they lie, Rasputin will come to them in a dream. In old churches, candles are lit near icons bearing his image, despite official bans. Some even begin calling him a martyr. Meanwhile, the Bolsheviks, eager to erase anything tied to the old world, suppress his name. They burn his photos, confiscate his letters, and ban any books that speak of him with anything less than contempt. But legends don't burn so easily. Rasputin lives on in songs, stories, folk prayers. He becomes the spirit of a Russia that no longer exists. Chaotic, strange, deeply spiritual, and always a little dangerous. The final whisper of an empire choking on its own incense. One fascinating, nearly forgotten detail: in the early Soviet years, a few desperate parents still write letters to Rasputin's last known address, begging for help with sick children. The building has long since been boarded up, but the letters keep coming. Because for some, he was never just a man. He was hope with a beard, a miracle in boots. And the death of the Romanovs only deepens that illusion. They become saints. He becomes their prophet. The whole tragic collapse is rewound and replayed over and over until history starts to sound like scripture. And so, while the red flags fly and Lenin delivers speeches, Rasputin lingers in the shadows, not defeated but transformed. Gone is the drunken holy man, crashing aristocratic parties. What remains is something more potent, a myth, one that Russia, for all its efforts, cannot quite bury. Years pass, empires fall, flags change, streets get renamed and statues are pulled down. But Rasputin? Somehow Rasputin just keeps showing up. Not in the flesh, of course. His remains are scattered ash, or lost, or possibly never real to begin with, depending on which legend you're reading. But in something stranger, he begins to live in culture, in memory, in myth, a shapeshifter who slips into whatever role the moment demands. And so, the 20th century gives birth to Rasputin the legend. At first, he's a tragic warning, the cautionary tale of a mystic who fooled a monarchy and helped doom it. He's discussed in dusty lecture halls, where professors in tweed declare him a textbook example of how superstition undermines statecraft. But that version doesn't last long. Theater producers get hold of him, then novelists, then, heaven help us, Hollywood. By the 1930s, Rasputin has made his silver screen debut. In Rasputin and the Empress, he's played by Lionel Barrymore with slashing eyebrows and a growl that sounds more lion than man. Historical accuracy? Not even invited. The real star is Rasputin's stare, his wild hand gestures, and the suggestion that he's seducing everything that moves. The film causes enough of a scandal that the real-life survivors of the Romanov family sue the studio. The result? The all-persons fictional disclaimer becomes standard movie fare. Yes, Rasputin is indirectly responsible for that legal footnote in your favorite rom-com. From there, the myth snowballs. By mid-century, Rasputin is appearing everywhere. Comic books, crime novels, pulp magazines with lurid covers and taglines like "The Mad Monk's Forbidden Nights." Some portray him as a magician, others as a satanic cult leader. One even casts him as a vampire, because apparently shooting him 3 times and drowning him just wasn't dramatic enough. Historians still argue whether these portrayals harmed or helped the truth, but honestly, truth was out of the running, long before the ink dried on the first film script. Rasputin's story had been turned into a lens, one that refracts whatever a culture wants to say about power, mystery, sex, and downfall. Need a villain for your political parable? Rasputin. Need a spiritual figure who goes too far? Rasputin. Need a hypnotist with bad hygiene and worse taste in friends? Rasputin. The transformation reaches its surreal peak in the 1970s, when the German disco group Boney M releases the song Rasputin. You know the one, thumping bass line, catchy chorus, lyrics that go, Rasputin, lover of the Russian queen, and so on. Yes, the same man once believed to hold the fate of the Romanovs in his hands is now being danced to in nightclubs under mirrored balls and synthetic wigs. Was it historically accurate? Absolutely not. Did it slap? Oh, yes. The song becomes a cult hit. For a generation who's never cracked a Russian history book, Rasputin becomes the bearded guy who may or may not have done questionable things to a Tsarina, and definitely sounds great at 120 beats per minute. And from there, it only gets stranger. Animated films portray him as a full-blown necromancer. In Anastasia, 1997, Rasputin is a green glowing sorcerer voiced by Christopher Lloyd, who loses his nose, keeps his soul in a magic reliquary, and dances with evil bats. Kids everywhere were terrified and oddly intrigued. In comic books, he becomes a recurring villain. In video games, a creepy NPC. He's fought Hellboy. He's haunted Sherlock Holmes. He's even been portrayed by Alan Rickman, whose performance was so intense it made audiences question whether Rasputin was kind of hot. Interpretations swing wildly. Some portray him as a misunderstood prophet, a man crushed by fate and fire. Others show him as an unkillable demonic force, a walking metaphor for every sin Russia ever tried to bury. He's played by character actors, rock stars, and the occasional pop culture parody who speaks in riddles and smells like prophecy and pickles. It's not just the West either. In post-Soviet Russia, Rasputin's image experiences a strange rehabilitation. No longer just a villain, he becomes a symbol of mystic Russia, a country where faith and chaos walk hand in hand. Some spiritual circles even refer to him as Saint Rasputin, unofficially of course, lighting candles and praying for his intercession in difficult times. Others hang posters of him on their walls, somewhere between Che Guevara and Bob Marley. It's hard to say what the statement is, but it probably involves the words energy and vibes. The internet era only magnifies things. Memes crop up with his wild stare and captions like, "When your spiritual leader won't die after 3 gunshots and a river dunk." TikTokers reenact his death scene with dramatic voiceovers. Conspiracy threads debate whether Rasputin was an alien, a time traveler, or the first Soviet psyop. One obscure Reddit thread even theorizes that Rasputin faked his own death and later re-emerged as a traveling accordion player in Kazakhstan. No proof, but also no disproof. Among spiritual communities, especially those that dabble in the esoteric or fringe orthodox mysticism, Rasputin still sparks debate. Was he a holy man who lost his way? A prophet ignored by the blind? A sinner whose sins were just particularly well lit? The debate lives on, looping like a candle's flicker in a drafty cathedral. What's astonishing isn't just that Rasputin is remembered, it's how he's remembered. Not just as a man, but as a vibe. He's a meme, a song, a scary story, and a theological case study. He's been turned into a Halloween costume and a PhD thesis. You can buy Rasputin vodka, Rasputin-themed candles, even bathrobes designed to resemble his infamous peasant tunic. His face has been printed on t-shirts, skateboards, and more than one regrettable forearm tattoo. And all the while, behind the glitz and pixels and party remixes, the actual Rasputin, born Grigori Yefimovich in a snowy village far from all this noise, remains strangely untouched. Somewhere beneath the jokes and exaggerations, there's still that man. The boy who wandered into the woods to pray. The pilgrim who walked barefoot for miles because God told him to. The wild-eyed mystic who held a dying child's hand and promised he would live. The sinner, the healer, the mystery. You can turn him into anything, and somehow he stays just out of reach. In the quiet moments, when the nightclub beats fade, when the screen goes dark, when the shelves of garish Rasputin-branded vodka gather dust, there's something still unfinished about him. Because for all the retellings, for all the pop culture twists and disco revisions, Rasputin remains that most stubborn kind of historical figure, unresolved. He's not like the others. No rousing battlefield speeches, no crisp military records, no neat political rise and fall, no clear alignment, hero or villain. Instead, Rasputin drifts through history's corridors like smoke, leaving behind a trail of conflicting memories and unanswered questions. And maybe that's why people can't let him go. There's something magnetic about a man who shouldn't have mattered, and yet absolutely did. He wasn't born into privilege. He wasn't educated in the seminaries of St. Petersburg or the halls of European intellect. He didn't command armies or win battles. He never even held an official position of power. And yet, at the height of the Russian Empire's unraveling, the Tsar and Tsarina were writing to him with trembling pens. In one of Alexandra's letters, now yellowed, fragile, and stored in an archive like a frozen relic, she writes simply, "Without you, we are lost." And maybe that's the key. Rasputin didn't control Russia, he reflected it. A country torn between old-world mysticism and modern chaos, between faith and reason, between peasant soil and imperial glitter. In that in-between space, Rasputin thrived. To the nobility, he was everything they feared about the unwashed masses. Loud, unpredictable, stubbornly pious in a way that didn't respect etiquette or hierarchy. To the poor, he was a miracle, one of their own who climbed the golden staircase and looked the empress in the eye without flinching. And to the church, a headache wrapped in robes. He never obeyed doctrine. He blessed when he shouldn't, touched when it was forbidden, healed without permission. And yet, people believed. They packed his rooms, whispered his name into pillows, and carried his advice like tiny sacred stones in their pockets. Of course there were lies. Of course there were rumors. He definitely drank too much. He probably crossed moral lines. And the sheer volume of scandal tied to his name makes even his most devoted defenders wince. But even his flaws became part of the draw. Here was a man who sinned and still claimed divine favor, who stumbled, mumbled, got lost in his own riddles, but still healed a bleeding child. There's something profoundly human in that contradiction. And while others have been flattened by history into either saints or monsters, Rasputin resists. His life is a kaleidoscope. Turn it one way and he's a holy fool. Turn it another, and he's a manipulative charlatan. Turn it again, and he's just a desperate man doing his best with the little power he had. Historians still argue whether Rasputin actually believed in his own visions, or simply rode the wave of influence with the skill of a village-born Machiavelli. Was he guided by God, or by something far less holy and far more hungry? Even now, his legacy sits under debate. In academic circles, Rasputin is dissected, footnoted, and debated in sleepy conferences held in climate-controlled hotels. But out in the world, he's something else entirely. He's been turned into puzzles on cafe trivia nights, pop songs on YouTube reaction channels, internet deep dives that start with the time Russia was controlled by a peasant wizard, and end in comment threads full of conspiracy theories and jokes. But beneath it all, there's a real man. One who wandered from Pokrovskoye in ragged boots, one who stood outside churches hoping someone would listen, one who met with strangers in dimly lit kitchens, listened to their pain, and tried, however imperfectly, to bring them peace. He didn't want to lead, he wanted to matter, and somehow he did. He left no manifesto, no library of sermons, just fragments, letters, rumors, grainy photos where his eyes seemed too large, too alive, even for the camera. There's that one photograph, the famous one, where he's staring straight at the lens, beard wild, eyes wide, one hand slightly raised. He's not posing, he's being, and somehow it feels like he's looking straight into you. You can almost hear him whisper, "There's more to the story than you think." And that's the legacy he leaves, not one of clear answers or heroic arcs, but of murk, of tension, of things that don't make sense but still feel true. He's Russia's spiritual Rorschach test. What you see in Rasputin says more about you than it ever will about him. Want to see corruption? It's there. Want to see redemption? Also there. Want to believe in a peasant mystic who cheated death, warned of revolution, and held empires in his hands without ever needing a crown? Absolutely, because Rasputin, for all his contradictions, offered people feeling, not reason, not order, but emotion, meaning, mystery. And in a world that keeps trying to explain everything, that kind of mystery is worth preserving, even if it wears muddy boots, even if it smells faintly of garlic and incense, even if it somehow refuses to die. The air in the old palace is stale. Dust motes dance where once chandeliers caught candlelight. Outside, the statues remain, but the people have changed. The imperial gardens are now state parks. The grand ballrooms host school tours, not dignitaries. The empire is long gone. But if you look hard enough, really look, you'll still find traces of Rasputin, in a footnote on a plaque, in the nervous chuckle of a guide describing the man who wouldn't die, in the tourists who arrive with half-remembered lyrics from a disco song and leave with their minds spinning from a tale that refuses to settle. Because there's something about Rasputin that won't stay put. History, when it works, likes its stories clean. Beginning, middle, end. A lesson tucked in for good measure. But Rasputin never gave us that. He defies the three-act structure. His beginning is murky, his middle is chaos, and his end, well, we've been over that. Try to close the book, and he slips a note into the spine that says, "Not quite." In Russia, he remains a contradiction. The Orthodox Church has never canonized him, but neither has it fully denounced him. His house in Pokrovskoye still draws pilgrims, curious visitors, and the occasional candle-bearing old woman who whispers prayers no one taught her. There's a small museum there now, faded, humble, a little dusty. Inside, a worn coat that may or may not have been his, a strand of hair behind glass, letters in looping, cryptic script, a cross made of wood leaning slightly to the left, as if even in death he can't stand entirely upright. People still write about him, new books every year, some trying to unravel him, others just embracing the madness. One author called him the black hole of Russian mysticism, another, the last prophet of the dying empire. A third simply said, "I don't know what Rasputin was, but he mattered." And maybe that's enough, because for all the pontificating, theorizing, and myth-making, Rasputin's legacy isn't just what he did, it's what he represented. To the Tsarina, he was a lifeline. To the Tsar, a liability. To the ministers, a menace. To the people, a puzzle. To the future, a symbol. He stood for the mystical, the irrational, the inexplicable. In a world that was supposed to be becoming modern, rational, explainable, he was dirt under a marble boot. He was a flickering candle in a palace lit by chandeliers. He didn't fit, and still, they couldn't get rid of him. Not easily, not cleanly, not without leaving a mark. Because Rasputin's story lingers not in its facts, but in its feelings. He made people believe, he made them fear. He made them whisper things they didn't dare say aloud in the daylight. Things about God, fate, power, death, love, magic. He made the mighty feel small, and the lowly feel seen. Even now, more than a century after he vanished into the Neva and into legend, we're still trying to decide who he was. Maybe he was a fraud, maybe a mystic, maybe just a man who understood that in uncertain times, belief is stronger than truth. Whatever he was, he's still with us. In history books and pop songs, in conspiracies and candle smoke, in quiet questions asked by late-night readers who pause mid-page and think, could it all really be true? And maybe in some way that's immortality. Not sainthood, not villainy, but the kind of afterlife where your name still gets whispered, not with certainty but with curiosity, where your story becomes a lullaby wrapped in madness. A bedtime history for those brave enough to wonder. And now, as we close this strange and winding journey through Russia's snow-covered corridors and candlelit drawing rooms, take a deep breath. The fire has burned low, the ink has dried, the footsteps in the palace have long since faded, and the streets outside are quiet once more. Let your thoughts drift now like falling snow. You've just walked with a man who defied expectation at every turn, a figure both reviled and revered, who turned the rigid clockwork of empire into something unpredictable, mysterious, and oddly human. Forget the headlines for a moment. Forget the caricatures. Imagine instead the hush of a Siberian village, a man kneeling in the frost, whispering prayers to a god he didn't fully understand, a flicker of candlelight on a worn icon, the sound of wolves in the distance, and one stubborn heartbeat echoing far louder than it should have. Let the chaos fade now. Let the laughter, the scandals, the shouting press, all dissolve into soft shadows. Let only the strange warmth of curiosity remain. Because sometimes history doesn't need to make sense. It just needs to be remembered. Thank you for staying with me through this curious tale of prophecy, power, and very persistent beard oil. Sleep well tonight. And if you dream of Russia, let it be the version with velvet, snowflakes, and a single strange figure walking alone, blessing the wind. Good night.